I guess. Okay, thank you guys for sitting in on the discussion that we're gonna have. Uh, Faraz and I have been friends for a few years. We talk about these sorts of things often in our own environment, in our own time. This is the first time, not the first time we've talked publicly about some potentially charged topics. This will be the first time that we're going to be streaming these particularly charged topics. And I want to put a clarification that in this conversation, it's not a formal debate. Neither of us is going to try to win or gotcha or use some sort of rhetorical skill to debunk or disprove or gotcha the other person. That's not really what we're trying to do. In fact, my goal is not necessarily to take my own position, the position of Ben Rice, and then try to find the position of Faraz Khan and smash them against each other. Honestly, my goal in this conversation is to try and help Faraz articulate and parse out the strongest version of some of his held beliefs and opinions that are often commonly brought up when he is streaming and is hyper distracted by playing a game at an insane level by trying to do a no hit or do a speed run of something, and instead have this be a location or a place where if someone does come in and has a particularly charged question and it gets brought up, he can say, hey, I did a podcast where you can see my focused thoughts on this particular matter or matters that are associated with it. And so what I'm going to be trying to do is help him to establish the best way to phrase his positions while also trying to challenge them and show that he's been exposed, and both of us have been exposed to different perspectives and the strongest counter arguments, so that it's clear that we're not trying to just show some biased thing of this is an echo chamber of both of us just being yes men of saying this. Some of these things were, Faraz has a few other disclaimers that are important to get out there, but that's that. I want to make it clear that that's my goal. So if someone says, Ben, you're not adequately defending a counter position, I'm trying my best to present his ideas. And in a lot of these things, I honestly do not have as developed or strong of a personal opinion on them, but I care a lot about Faraz and I want to try and help him at least give what I think to be or assume to be the best version of his argument, while also making sure he's exposed to what seemed to me to be the strongest counter arguments. So that's my goal in this conversation.
Okay, fair enough. So my disclaimers in this conversation are more to do with TOS and cancellation and cancel culture. So I want to make it clear that neither myself or Ben Rice are saying any of these things in a hateful or malicious way. Our intention is not to utter hate speech or offend or hurt anybody at all. What we are trying to do mainly is discuss contentious topics and discuss them well. And in order to do that, we do need to touch on different perspectives. And certain perspectives are now considered not okay or hate speech. So very, very clear from the beginning. Disclaimer, our intention here is to discuss, not to offend, not to hurt. But in order to discuss and contend with certain ideas, that will be a risk. So I want to say that. Secondly, I want to say as well, and this is something that Ben Rice and I will potentially talk about in the future, which is the responsibility a broadcaster or a public figure has on its audience. We're not going to talk about that this time because it's too large of a topic. But the way that I'm going to regard my words is I'm going to express myself to the best of my ability. And however that is interpreted by another person is not my responsibility. From there, that person can ask me for clarification, as I will give you all of chat the opportunity to do so. However, if you take what I said and run away with it and spread it elsewhere, those are not my words. Those are yours. We're having this discussion for clarification and understanding, not necessarily to create drama or negativity. Second disclaimer, did I have any others, Ben Rice, or were those pretty much it?
Those were the two. You gave 3 initially when we talked a little bit last night,
Hmm.
and I don't remember what the third one was.
I don't remember what the third one was. We'll get to it if we need to, but we should probably start. So with that, I'll
Yeah.
turn off chat. Oh, we can start talking. I'm a little bit nervous for this.
Well, now that the chat's gone, it's just you and me again, so we can just kind of go with that, but less gossipy stuff. I think that'll be the main change, because you and I
Twitter
we
stuff,
do this
yeah.
a lot, right?
Yeah.
No me going over and reading people and roasting Twitter accounts for their ridiculous bios.
Yeah.
By the way, if you have a ridiculous bio on Twitter,
No.
and Faraaz and I are talking in a voice call, I will probably scroll over it and roast you, but that doesn't mean that
This is true.
that you're
I think you
not a
should do
worthy
it
person.
publicly. I think you should do it publicly. I think it's really
Well,
funny.
maybe we'll try
Yeah,
a
I was
stream
talking
sometime.
to Rebs, and she was like, "It's so funny," and I was like, "Yeah, it's so funny," but he won't do it for the public. Okay, so my first point. So the way I have done my research is I've done research over the last week and a half ish.
That was the disclaimer, by the way.
Yes.
That neither Faraz and I are actually upper level education researchers on this. We've done some research, it's independent research, but there might be some things that we are not aware of. And this is a conversation that we're going to be having, but there are also continued education opportunities for both of us. We haven't been exposed to the entirety of the background and the theory and the scientific consensus or the scientific challenges that have been proposed on some of these topics. So we are both two people that are doing our absolute best to have this discussion in good faith, trying our best to work with the information that we could find to try and find counterexamples, but neither of us are PhDs in these topics, and we submit that our authority is limited to some people that have done our best effort. But that was the other disclaimer, that we can't purport ourselves to be authority figures on this, other than these are the conclusions we've come to based on what we could find. Go ahead, first topic.
Thank you. Okay, so the way I structured this, I'll go through an overview. The first few topics are the boring topics. When we get to Bill C-16, that's where I think things get interesting, and that's where I have the brunt of what I want to say. So the first topic is the definition of race, the definition of transphobia. The reason being that I have been called transphobic, homophobic, misogynistic, sexist, all sorts of terms like these, and I want to get to the bottom of if I actually am or not, because I feel like this happens all the time. So after this is the boring stuff. We'll get to Bill C-16, which is in my understanding more interesting. And so my position is, well, I don't believe I am sexist, misogynistic, or transphobic, or homophobic, or racist, or whatever. I don't believe that this is the case, yet I have been called this. And so one thing I need to go through is the original definition of transphobia. So the initial definition of transphobic is showing a dislike of or prejudice against transsexual or transgendered people. Bullying is commonly underpinned by sexist, homophobic, or transphobic attitudes. For example, the Merriam-Webster definition is an irrational fear of, aversion to, or discrimination against transgender people. And then we have to go into discrimination. Okay, discrimination, definition of discrimination. Prejudice or prejudicial outlook, action, or treatment. For example, racial discrimination. And then the definition of prejudice: injury or damage resulting from some judgment or action of another in disregard of one's rights, especially detriment to one's legal rights or claims. So those are the dictionary definitions. That's one set of definitions. The second set of definitions I found from so this is what Planned Parenthood regards as transphobic. Transphobia is a fear, hatred, disbelief, or mistrust of people who are transgender, thought to be transgender, or whose gender expression does not conform to traditional gender roles. Transphobia can prevent transgender and gender nonconforming people from living full lives free from harm. Transphobia can take many different forms, including negative attacks and beliefs, aversion to and prejudice against transgender people, irrational fear and misunderstanding, so these are all in line, disbelief or discounting preferred pronouns or gender identity. This is where it starts to blur. derogatory language and name calling, bullying, abuse, and even violence. So the definition of transphobic has expanded a little bit according to Planned Parenthood. Next, I went through the government of Canada, gov.nl.ca. They have definitions of transphobic, cisnormative bullying and harassment. So one of the things they say in this huge document is exclusion from gendered spaces corresponding to their gender identity, removing or banning someone from a gendered space. So, for example, a woman's bathroom and a male bathroom, a transgendered person has access to whichever one they are claiming their gender to be, and not allowing them in that space is considered bullying, and is akin to hate speech. Forcing a trans person to use a gender neutral option despite their request to use the option associated with their gender identity. So even if you have a bathroom that is gender neutral, so either gender can go in, it is transphobic to not let them go into the bathroom of the male or females. For example, forcing a student to use staff washroom or the gender neutral washroom when they have clearly articulated they would like to use a washroom in alignment with their gender identity. So this is considered bullying. And it's not necessarily that I'm against this, but this is interesting because there's more to this than it seems. One of the requirements for getting a certificate to allow you to opt into the surgery to fully transition requires that you live 2 years, I think in Canada at least, 2 years as the opposite sex. And that includes going into the washrooms, doing all these things, living as a woman if you're originally a man, and living as a man if you're originally a woman. So it is a requirement to do these things. However, that poses a lot of problems in society where bathrooms are, they're places of vulnerability. They're places of they are separated for a reason. You have something to chime in with?
Yeah, I think that so just a little bit of housekeeping there as we're going through the definitions that were just presented. I think it's, we can check off when it comes to negative attitudes or beliefs. I'm pretty sure that Faraaz does not treat or would not treat a transgendered individual poorly due to being trans. I think if you met somebody and you find that they are trans, your opinion of them does not turn instantly negative based on that sole information, right?
Correct.
I know it sounds redundant, but as we're going through aversion to and prejudice against transgender people, I do not believe that Faraaz has any of that. Irrational fear or misunderstanding. Misunderstanding is odd to me to be in the definition of something that is like, to say that someone does not fully understand a thing is hateful towards them is a concerning addition to a definition. To me, that makes me that starts to feel like it ascribes malice to a lack of formal education, which is concerning. Derogatory language and name calling. I don't think Faraaz would ever call someone names based on anything other than them being overly emphatic on their love of the Dark Souls series. Bullying and abuse and even violence. Faraaz doesn't hurt people unless he's fighting in Muay Thai. And the bullying is that's kind of what we're going into in terms of these definitions. So I think it's pretty clear, at least, again, to clarify this position, Faraaz is, in my understanding, is not hateful or violent to or scared of trans people. So
Yes.
when we are going into this position, we are looking at some cases that are concerning less about trans people and more about the societal impact that may happen when certain legislation is enacted in regard to any particular group, especially one that is bringing up some of these concerns when it comes to these gendered spaces where there are instances of people, and this might seem like a loaded thing, but someone like rape survivor instances where they have predominantly women's spaces, right? There's certain places where like rape counselors are typically of the same gender or biological sex of the victim, and it is seen as a pretty psychologically risky scenario to try and have somebody who is going through some sort of counseling for a sexual assault to be there. So if we're looking at the conversation of what is the point of having gendered spaces as opposed to pushing towards everything being completely gender neutral, my best understanding of Faraz's position is that there are times in society that we can look to where certain concerns and or problems may arise from degrading or diminishing the opportunity for specific binary gender divides to be corroded or conformed into one place. That's my best understanding of it. So it's not, I don't like trans people and I hate this thing. It's not about the person. It's about the societal switch, especially when you start to legislate these sorts of things and say we are going to enforce a legislation, which anytime you legislate something into law, that means under threat of imprisonment or death, which seems ridiculous. But jaywalking is legislated as something that if you refuse, you will be fined. If you refuse the fine, you can be imprisoned, or through that system, it is we are threatening you with our military government oversight. We can take away your rights because you have done this thing. And most of the laws that we have that include imprisonment right away are are things that societally we all pretty much just agree. If you kill someone, you should go to jail for that. But any time that you legislate something into law where there are fines or prison time that is punishable, you have to extend that these are government enforced, potentially via some sort of violent enactment. So that's the level of this. Something as simple as legislating jaywalking can lead to a person's personal freedoms being taken away. You can be put in jail for breaking a law. So it's different from having a personally held belief as opposed to legislating something, saying this is in the government, this is in our laws. You can go to court, you can have your personal freedoms taken away, and that is where I think the core of Faraz's concerns come about. So
yes. Speaking a little bit further, so this is a tangent, and I wanted to get to this later, but we can just get to this now. So I have it here somewhere where I have a lawyer talking about what can actually happen if you misgender someone. And basically what it is that now that it is in the law, Bill C-16, we're going to get to this later as well, you can go to jail for breaching these policies. So technically it's the Human Rights Tribunal. And so if you misgender someone and maybe you do it purposely, maybe you do it not purposely, they have grounds for complaint, which means they have the right, and it is correct for them to report the Human Rights Tribunal, at least in Ontario, which is in Canada, and say, hey, this person is inciting hate speech against me. And then you will go to court. And you may lose the court battle, or you may win the court battle, but the whole idea is there's grounds for that. Now, if you lose the court battle, there are two things that can happen. You can have a monetary trial, and so they'll issue you a fine. If you don't pay the fine, they will garnish your wages. They will make your life worse. And there are cases of this. This is what actually happens. If you don't pay a fine, they can bankrupt you. Like they can do all these things. So it's not just a fine of like $100, $200, $3,000. Your entire livelihood might be at stake if you choose not to pay this fine. Now, there are also non-monetary trials. So there are monetary and non-monetary trials. For example, a potential consequence of a non-monetary trial would be, okay, court orders you to go through sensitivity training. Now, if you do not go through sensitivity training, if you say, no, I'm not doing that, then you are technically in contempt of court. You see this in all the shows. You're in contempt of court. So when they interrupt too much and the judge is like, do this one more time, and you're in contempt. If you're in contempt of court, then they can throw you in jail. So although people say, no, you can't go to jail for this or whatever, no, you definitely can go to jail for these things. And that's one of the things that's in Bill C-16, which we will get to later. Like, it's not just like, oh, it's just a small thing. It's just a, no. This is very serious. You have the full weight of the law potentially against you if you breach these terms rightfully or wrongfully. You have anything there, Ben Rice? You want me to continue?
No, just to double down on the idea that anytime we're talking about the difference between a personally held belief and something that is legislated and placed into law means that you are backing it now with the ability of a federal government to remove your freedom to exist as you wish, and to place you into some sort of confined space for the amount of time. It's anything that is law that has some sort of punishment, even if the punishment is a fine. If you refuse to pay that fine, then you can end up getting, having it expanded into other things. So it's however small some sort of legislation seems to be, that is something that people, I think, often overlook. And I think that, again, is really the core of what Faraz's concerns are. Not about the individual person, or you're bad because you're this way, or because you might have a different lived experience than him or I might have. And that is my best understanding of your position.
Yes. So back to the definitions. Again, I want to get through this as fast as possible. But there was the original definition, the dictionary definitions, and then there were the additional definitions, Planned Parenthood, Government of Canada, and stuff. And so with these things, I wanted to state the difference between the two definitions. So it's much easier to be transphobic in the latter definitions. And so I looked up some cases. There was a case of what's it called? A transgendered woman who went into the female washroom, and there happened to be a 10-year-old girl in there, and the transgendered woman then abused that 10-year-old girl. There's a case right here. There's another case where a weightlifter, transgendered woman again, so someone who used to be a male, transitioned to female, competed in weightlifting, did not tell anybody that they were transgendered, and they broke 12 women's world records. And shortly after that, they were stripped of their titles because that's considered unfair. Now, technically, that's not okay. And a lot of people would argue that the Weightlifting Association, whoever was in charge of that, whoever stripped the titles,
Probably the
IWF, is transphobic. So there are a lot of difficult to navigate situations from that come from this, where it's almost inevitable that you won't be transphobic, or you won't be racist, or you won't be this, or you won't be that. And the definitions really do matter. That's why expanding on these definitions without due course or due option is a strange thing. Like, there's technically, even talking about this stuff is technically transphobic. And so I don't, well, for one, I don't necessarily think that these accusations of being transphobic, racist, or misogynistic are true. I think what's happening now more and more so, is that people are taking original definitions, adding things to them to suit the viability of accusing other people as transphobic, instead of actually dealing with the problem. Okay, well, what do we do with the weightlifters that are the physical competitors that used to be men and had testosterone and different bone structure and all of these things for 30 years, and then transition to female, and the next year over, they're breaking records? Like, what do you do with that? Instead of even having that discussion, you're just saying, oh no, you're transphobic, we don't even need to listen to you, which doesn't help the problem at all. And I think that's a tactic that's being used. And I think that's why a lot of people resort to these behaviors of saying, oh, you're just transphobic, you're just dismissive, or you're just racist, or you're just this, instead of actually contending with the arguments that are being brought up. So far, so good?
With those particular ones, I, as somebody who is a competitive powerlifter, which is slightly different than weightlifting, in that it's better. Just kidding. It is, but that's a personally held belief, and I can't prove it beyond being right about it. Man, I can't stop myself at this point, it seems. We've also had issues with that particular situation in the IPF, which is the International Powerlifting Federation. IWF is International Weightlifting Federation, and the way that it was handled or the way that it was addressed was as a drugs issue, because when someone was there were instances of that, and I did not handle it, but I've seen it become a topic of contention and something that is being hotly debated of whether or not trans athletes should be allowed to compete as their transitioned gender. And I know, at least in the USAPL, which is the US version of the International Federation, they've decided that, well, since usually you're using some sort of hormones to make that transition, using any kind of hormone manipulation goes against the drug testing policy. If I took hormones, even if they were doctor prescribed, it would prevent me from being a drug tested athlete. And so in most of these sports where it's drug tested, it's usually seen as a drugs issue because of the hormone involvement. But I definitely believe I'm familiar with that particular case. I think the argument that I have heard the most that is presented on trans athletes competing as their preferred one is that there have been statistically fewer instances of them excelling in those sports. But my own personal observation about that, because I've had a few of these conversations, and someone says that statistically speaking, your chances of winning as a trans athlete are not significantly higher. At least that's not what we've seen in the data. My argument would be, I wonder how that in certain sports maybe, but I wonder how that applies to strength sports specifically, where there seem to be bigger physiological differences from the biological sexes in terms of hormone development for maximum strength and musculature output.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen people that have just argued that those don't exist. And that is not my understanding. As not a PhD in physiology, but someone who's spent a lot of time involved in these spaces, it seems a little bit dismissive in terms of the biological difference of natural hormone production, in terms of testosterone being something that vastly increases your capacity to build muscle mass. Mm-hmm. And things like bone density and bone structure being different across biological sexes. So
Yes.
that familiar with those, and yeah, I'm also. But I think the argument that I've seen, because I said I'm going to try and give you what seems the most compelling argument, is that statistically it does not seem that is something that is happening rampantly or across the board, that in all these instances it's happening, but especially in strength sports, I've been made familiar with some of those examples.
And so my pushback to that argument was, it doesn't have to happen rampantly. It just has to happen a few times in certain places to point to the idea that it is not generally how we want to do things, right? Combat sports or strength sports, you could technically, and these are the cases, you could have a male for 30 years transition to female, year 31, they still have that bone density, they still have the effects of testosterone, the development of testosterone in their body, and they go and they smash girls and whatever they're doing. Combat sports, it's very irresponsible.
Yeah, combat sports seems like probably the most compelling in terms of you have another person's health and safety, and it is a little bit more at risk in those instances.
Yeah, there's a lot of different cases for this. I don't think we need to go over this too much because it's very obvious.
I always want to avoid though making an appeal to what feels like common sense, because I think that we have a tendency to well, it just makes sense to me. Obviously, nothing's obvious in this stuff.
Fair enough.
It may feel that way, but we always have to resist the urge to do that, or else we will just always default to our own pre-held bias, and
Yes.
so it is important to examine the data and to pull your examples from that understanding. So always be willing to re-examine something that you held to be a common sense belief if you don't have some sort of data to formulate that on.
Yes.
That's just a general rule to live by when you're dealing, especially with these very charged topics that there is some disagreement on.
Yeah. And I would say, okay, well, to go further more on that, there are reasons there are men's leagues and women's leagues. You can technically apply for a men's league as a woman, I believe. Like the NBA, I think you can apply for that. I'm not sure if there's any restrictions. But the reasons that these things are different is because there are differences between men and women. Although people might not like that idea or that might not be politically correct, there are developmental differences as well as other differences. And for example, men are generally better off in terms of upper body strength, not necessarily lower body strength, but upper body strength. There's a bunch of other documented things, but there are reasons for these differences. There are reasons for different leagues and stuff like that. It's not so, flimsy that we can just take one and move one here and take one and move one here, and then you can say, well, for us, there are women who can beat up men. And it's like, yes, that is correct, and this is something Joe Rogan has said. There are women that can beat the shit out of men. Yes, that is correct. But I also know men who women do not stand a chance against because they just hit way harder. There's so much more difference in terms of in development at the extremes. Like you take, for example, you take someone who's extremely violent. They're much more likely to be a man than a woman.
When we're talking about these things, I think it's important to recognize that we're talking about average populations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when someone says men have more upper body strength than women, what is really being meant by that is that on average, if you took 100 random men and 100 random women with no special training or anything, we're looking at it is more likely that you'll have a higher average of men in that group that have higher upper body strength and women who probably will have more natural flexibility. Right? It's not necessarily like everything is positive in this one way and negative in the other direction. There are trade-offs to certain things in those, and it's so we're talking about average populations more often than not. And while you can find an outlier in any of those populations where you say, I know, because I know some women that are stronger than most of my male friends and I'm in strength sports. I have a female friend who can squat 600 pounds, and at the same body weight of a lot of trained other male powerlifters. She's an incredible athlete. I know less of those women than I do men who can do that. Than I know they can do that feat, and she's considered exceptional in that field. So we're talking about averages. There's definitely exceptions to certain things, but that's
Yes. The men and women are more closely the same than they are different. However, the differences are very much more pronounced at the extremes. That's why more men are in prison than women. That's why more women are generally in the like the nurses than men. There's like all sorts of these things and that manifest. But it's what the arguments we're trying to make, or I'm trying to make here, is that there are differences and they become very widely represented at the extremes. So at the height of physical ability or the height of competitive ability, or in certain temperaments and stuff like that. That's what I'm trying to say. However, again, that's tangential. So the original point was, hey, am I transphobic? And according to the original definition, I am not transphobic. I am not discriminatory, this and that, towards trans people. However, due to the expansion of the definition by
the stipulative definition.
Definition, yes. Almost anybody can be called transphobic. There's another case where this goes into the Bill C-16 stuff, but there was a man who went into the women's shower at I think it was a YMCA. I have it somewhere in the document. And and showered in the women's shower, and a security guard took the man and kicked him out of the YMCA because it's like, that's not allowed. But it turns out the man was someone who was transitioning or um, saying that no, I'm a female, or I'm transgendered female, and that person now has the grounds to complain and say, oh, they were being transphobic. That is something that is in the law now. And that is a very dangerous thing because it does not accommodate the original definition. It accommodates more the expanded stipulative definition. And so this is why I say definitions are important, because generally, if you are called a transphobe or a misogynistic or a homophobe, which is it's thrown around very commonly these days, it's most likely not true. And it's not just not true, it's not acceptable, because those words are referred to for people that are actually transphobic, racist, or homophobic. And to take those words and to apply to someone who does not deserve that or is not a representative of that is incredibly irresponsible, and it's a very terrible thing to do when done seriously. It's a horrible thing to do because it puts a label on them. And this goes to the next part of this, and the last part of the definition talk is the definition of racism, and how the definition of racism has gone through different iterations and why this is a terrible thing and why it's irresponsible. So the definition of racism is a belief that race is a fundamental determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. That is from the Merriam-Webster dictionary. There's also a definition of racism 2.0, and then there's a definition of racism 3.0. And I don't have them here, but I think they include something along the lines of, yes, it involves race and it involves power dynamics. So if you're in a position of power, then you cannot be discriminated against, according to these definitions. Is that correct, Ben Rice?
So yeah, what Faraaz is referring to is a classical definition of something, what we hold to believe, and then something that's called the stipulative definition, where you start to add different things. A stipulative definition is a type of definition where new or currently existing term is given new and specific meaning for the purposes of argument or discussion in a given context. The one that Faraaz is referring to is racism as prejudice plus power, which is a very common one. Some of you guys might be familiar with Faraaz will occasionally tweet things, and there was once a tweet that he gave, and someone gave a pretty emotionally charged response to that, and told Faraaz that he was being racist. And Faraaz was trying to point out something of like, well, in this instance, another example is being racist, and the person says that isn't that person doesn't have as much power in the situation. So they were using the prejudice plus power, and prejudice plus power is an addendum, where it was the stipulation that was added. According to this definition, two elements are required in order for racism to exist: racial prejudice and social power to codify or enforce the prejudice into an entire society. I believe that this was, I'm trying to find the year that this was added to that. It was a definition that was first proposed by Patricia Bidall, who wrote it in a 1970 book, defined as prejudice plus institutional power. So and I will say that something to be aware of is that language is something that evolves. Our understanding of certain things evolves. This is something, I think, Faraaz, with your pointer example that you have talked about in the past, of the importance of what this word means, and we can add things to it, but there's a part that remains from that, where there's a feeling that's associated with the word. But when you start to add qualifiers to it, I believe Faraaz starts to question and say, how far can this go? What other qualifiers can be added? At what point is a word and stands for what it has originally stood for? And again, does this open the door to concerns on a societal legislation level? At least that's
Yes.
my understanding of where your concern comes from.
So yeah, I'll illustrate it with a. So I haven't done this very much, but this is something I did last night, and I think it works quite well. But I said a term, the word racism or any term is a pointer. Pointer is something. Alexa, a pointer is something in programming, and basically what it states is that let's say you have this little wolf pendant, and we'll say this is racism for now. And so this term will point to a definition. And so this definition is the original definition, a belief that race is a fundamental determinant of human traits and capacities and so on and so forth. But this term will also point to a feeling you get when you hear it. So when you hear racism, it's generally like, oh, bad, don't do that. Like, that's not acceptable under any circumstance. It doesn't benefit anybody. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help your neighbor. It doesn't help your friends. The KKK are racist. There are lots of racial groups, white supremacy. You get a certain feeling that it's pointing to a definition, and it's pointing to a certain feeling as well. And these three things are interlinked, right? Now, what they're doing, or whoever is changing these definitions for their own benefit, or who knows, maybe they're ideal compassionate, is they're taking the original definition and they're modifying it, so it's no longer the original term, and they're changing it into this. This is a different definition. This is racism with power dynamics, right? And the racism with power dynamics might include things like, oh, you can't be racist towards white people because they're in power. This terminology has a completely different feeling to it. Completely different. So now, racism is not bad in every situation. It's okay in certain situations, or the different definition changes the feeling associated with that term. However, because the term is the same, the feeling is left over. It's the same feeling as it was before, which was, I don't know, what was it? What did I use? A controller or something? Yeah,
you had the PlayStation 5. No,
maybe I
don't
used a
even know
phone
what it
or
was.
something, but I had some feeling there. That feeling remains, and it is now attached to the new term, or sorry, the new definition, which is inaccurate and irresponsible. It's not okay because these two things don't equate, but because you did not change the term, now these things equate in people's minds. So, for example, it is not good with the original definition of racist to be racist under any circumstance. It is not. However, if you look at the new definition of racism, you incorporate power dynamics. And one of the things I have found is that a school or a school district or something, it's in the document, has removed, so there's white people and there's people of color. And this is what they've had in their little definition. And now what they've done is they've removed Asians, and now white people and Asians are together and people of color are everybody else, which is a ridiculous thing because that means, oh, Asians are no longer people of color. And we saw this with what Twitch did as well. Apparently people of color means black people because we're going to promote a people of color campaign where we take 32 black creators and put them on the front page. It's like, where are the other colors? So these new definitions become ridiculous, but they retain the same feeling, which is hundreds of years of history and struggle and mistakes in the making, whereas this new one is not. And I find that to be incredibly irresponsible and misleading. That would be my point with how the definition of racism has changed and why it's not okay and why people are using that word so flippantly nowadays.
Okay, trying to clean up the articulation.
Thank you.
Ridiculous makes me nervous in terms of that, of like, this is ridiculous, as opposed to, that sounds more charged, as opposed to it does make it difficult when you hold on to the same expected response and emotional charge or feeling that is associated by calling something racist. That if that feeling still remains, where you add in other things that might weaken the position or the stated requirements of being racist, or allowing someone to not be associated with that, saying I can't be because of X, in this instance the stipulative definition, instead of saying that I think that maybe the idea, because I don't think it's so much that you have a problem with people coming up with new terms. I think that you have more of a concern with someone saying that prejudice plus power is still the same definition of race, or is the complete replacement, where racism no longer means racism. This is the new definition, as opposed to what I believe it ought to be, which is the stipulative definition. We're saying this is another term that is not necessarily the same thing, where this is a new concept in this, adding something as opposed to removing an original, replacing it with something that is less effective and has more stipulation involved, is concerning to you.
Very concerning to me. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
This just saying this is ridiculous. Just almost
It
sounds
is ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
But you don't. But you feel that way. But I don't think
Listen,
that is your strongest position.
Look, okay.
I don't think that's your strong. I think that
we
sounds
can have
emotionally
a
charged.
very boring, and this is what is probably the safest. A very boring.
I'm trying to help you articulate the strongest position.
I do appreciate it.
That is what we're doing.
I will
and your
continue
strongest
to be-
position is not an appeal to emotional outrage and ridiculous.
It is
It
ridiculous.
sounds
It's
like
absolutely ridiculous.
Sure, you might feel
Yeah.
that way, but that isn't the position that you can defend.
That is what I have to put forth. I have to put forth myself, and not necessarily the documented form of myself. So it is ridiculous.
Okay.
All right.
That is Faraaz's position.
That is my position. It's ridiculous. Yes. Okay. So boring stuff over. Hey, great. I think with that, the whole idea with there was like, say, I don't think I'm transphobic. Here's why. Here are the definitions of transphobia. Here's what they've been inflated to. And so technically with the new inflated stipulative definitions, everything and everybody is transphobic because of the contradictory nature of the way society is built out itself. Now the interesting stuff. So this is interesting. I think this is very interesting. So now we get to talk about Bill C-16. And so now I'm actually like, now it's less fucking boring shit. And now it's like, hey, look what's happening.
I don't think it's boring, for the record. I like our conversations.
No.
Yeah.
But it's like, that's just, what we have to get through. So Bill C-16. Okay, so I got a few things here, and we can go back and forth on this because there's a lot here. And so here's my overview. Bill C-16 substantiates compelled speech into Canadian common law. Compelled speech is a totalitarian concept. It's not one of democracy. It's not one of the individual. It is a totalitarian thing. Compelled speech is not a good thing. It's not something you want. And that is very different from not saying something. Compelled speech is being forced to say something. And that's something I do not agree with. Secondly, Bill C-16 puts into law unscientific ideas and concepts. It puts into law a social constructionist view of gender, which is not necessarily based in science. And I have supporting arguments for that, which I will go into. And not only that, but lastly, the people who are doing this are not oblivious to what they're doing. There are many heavy indications that the people that are pushing for Bill C-16, not everybody in the world, of course, but the people who are actually pushing for it, the legislators and so on and so forth, know exactly what they're doing. And so we can get into whichever one you want first.
Yeah, I'd be there. That's an appeal to intent, which we can never make, right? We can never know someone's true intent.
No, but there are indications. That's why.
Sure, you can make indications and come to those conclusions. I think it's important to remember and I would say this in our conversations too. This isn't just for the people that are watching. Anytime that we make an appeal to someone's intent of saying I can assume their intent. You are assuming fundamentally. So don't giggle like Ben's trying to prevent his friend from getting canceled, and that's why he's going into these. I do this all the time.
Yeah.
Of trying to clarify to make sure that I can, because I can't grant a point and move on unless I actually grant the point. Just like Faraaz can't let something not be stated that he feels it's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous.
For anybody who's unfamiliar, though, the Canadian Bill C-16 is an amendment to the Canadian Human Rights Act. which is extending the protection of. So it's an attempt to legislate and add in gender and gender identity into the protection of the Human Rights Act that normally would cover protection from discriminatory practices. So originally it covered race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, age, sex, sexual orientation, marital status, family status, disability, or conviction of an offense for which a pardon has been granted, or in respect of which a record suspension has been ordered. The Bill C-16 is the addition to that of adding in gender identity or expression.
Mhm.
So that is
Interesting
that
point here.
is. Yep, that's what the proposed thing is.
Yes.
Go.
So based on what he said there, that actually goes into the next thing that we can talk about. So from there we can
What
actually
is the definition of gender expression or
we
identities?
yeah, there's two things we can do here. So one is, well, first we can look at what Ben Rice said: race, national or ethnic origin, color, sexual orientation, marital status, family status, etc. These were the bases of discrimination originally. Now, when you add gender identity into that, things get difficult, because every single other grounds,
it ridiculous.
yeah, ridiculous. Every other grounds discrimination are certifiable with objective evidence. Gender is not. And it's because gender identity is based entirely off of subjective feeling, not objective evidence, like the others for discriminatory practice. So you are taking something that is very hard, that operates on the basis of faith and goodwill, and that is the outlier from all those other terms. So putting that in there doesn't seem like a big deal, but it actually is a big deal because of the nature of the terminology. That's a pretty important fact. And then from there, laws, like there are lots of things. Like there's a case of these are legally allowed cases of a guy who said, I have the document, who said, I'm being discriminated against. My pronouns are your majesty. This was an actual case. They're discriminating against me and my kinglyship or courtdom or whatever it's called, monarchy, or my court. Of course, that case was thrown out. And there's another case where someone was required to shave their beard for their job. And they said, no, you're discriminating against me on the basis of gender expression, because this is expression of my gender. Of course, that case was thrown out as well. But it's important to note that this was not before the expenditure of resources and time and energy. Like, these things do take a toll, and these things do happen. So although they are ridiculous, they do happen, and they do have a cost to them. And that's the smallest gradation of how bad this can become. So the very idea that you are putting something that is subjective as a basis of discrimination is already not okay. And this is one, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be gender identity. It could be how you feel. And so furthermore to that, there's a quote from Barbara Kay of the National Post. And she says, dignity, or classic liberalism was concerned with dignity. Progressive liberalism is based on feelings. Two very different things, right? Dignity has a rational basis to it. It has law incorporated into it. They have measurable things: race, ethnic origin, all of these things. Feelings are completely on good faith. So this is why the Me Too movement was so dangerous. And I spoke about this as well. Its feelings are going to dictate what's appropriate or not. So someone could say, I felt uncomfortable in this situation. And from there, that could lead to a cancellation, a deplatforming, or something of that nature. A lost job, anything based on a feeling. Not he did this and this that breached this line. It was, I felt this way, and because of that, this person is terrible. So it's a very blurry line. It's a very vague term. It can go either way in every situation. Those are not grounds for punitive action. That I don't see it as grounds, and I don't see how anybody can see it as grounds because it's so potentially one way or the other. It's not concrete. And to have that in law is in itself a very terrible thing. Ridiculous. Ben Rice.
Yeah. Okay. Articulation time. At least, or reframing. It comes back to the idea that anytime you have my understanding of Faraz's position, it is less about you have this personally held belief, and it is more about a personally held belief that becomes legislation needs to stand up to perfect scrutiny under penalty of imprisonment or death. A violent upholding of anything that becomes legislated. So anytime that you start to take a personally held belief and turn it into a law that everyone in a society has to follow, you had better have the success rate of it being
Almost
statistically
perfect.
high enough that you do not risk people slipping through the cracks and losing their livelihood in that. And I think that would be your position as it applies to most things. Anytime that someone is going to try and make some sort of this is how we act on a governmental and law enforcement practice, you have societal concerns. If the fail rate is not statistically compelling enough to almost completely and perfectly ensure that people are not going to get have problems, and that becomes more consistently problematic when there are aspects to it that are more emotionally based as opposed to provable and falsifiable with documented evidence.
Exactly. Yes. And there are arguments there that are like, for example, the most common argument is, hey, if you don't like this, or just avoid the situation, or just call them by whatever name they want to be called by, or whatever, things like that. Like, people will often make the case of, what's the problem? You can just say their pronoun. Or what's the problem? You can just say this if you don't want to deal with it, and stuff. And I think that's something we should touch on in a bit. I think the first thing we should go through from here, because I want to talk about the nature of how it's considered unscientific, and then I want to talk about the totalitarian nature of it before we get into that. Would that be
Okay.
Yeah, that would be acceptable.
No,
Okay,
if
so
that's what you want to do.
let's go with the idea that, and this is something I can back up. So this isn't just a belief. This isn't just a perspective. This is scientifically documented. And I have the articles here, and Kerchak has access to the document now. You can link them in chat if you would like. But the claim, so the whole idea is that sex is your sex is your sex. You can't change your sex, your biological sex. Social constructionists want to separate that from gender. They want to say gender is independent of biological sex. Gender is how you feel, how you express yourself, all sorts of things in this realm. So their claim is that gender is independent from biological sex. And this is not true. This is not true at all. So I've got some quotes here from Dr. Deborah So and some studies that are also indicative of this. Let me just have them here. So biology dictates hormone exposure in utero. That's true. Gender is how we feel whenever we feel, whether we feel masculine, feminine, or somewhere in between in relation to biological sex. Over 99% of us, over 99% of us, our biological sex is our gender identity. For the other less than 1%, those are considered intersex. However, intersex is not proof that gender is a spectrum. People that are different in sex development possess anatomy of both sexes due to genetics and hormonal exposure in the womb. So these are intersex people. They either have like a vulva and some testicular tissue, or one, or they have both. They are representing both sexes, basically, intersex. Now, this is also due to hormonal exposure. So even before birth, exposure to testosterone changes the way in which male and female brains grow. There is no way differences between men and women are purely due to socialization unless you are going to argue that an unborn child is capable of learning gender stereotypes while still in the womb. And so here are a few articles as well. There's a Live Science article, a PNAS article, and a Wiring the Brain article, which point to NCBI articles. There's thousands of studies that show that prenatal, which means before birth, prenatal hormone exposure dictates brain development. And brain development, of course, it has a factor in gender identity. And so we can go further. Do you want to chime in, or do you want me to go further?
Yeah, I will. Like I said, I try to present the counter argument to some of these. The strongest argument that I am personally aware of in defense of gender as a social construct would be it's almost a semantic definition when you're referring to gender expression being something that is caused by the feelings associated with hormonal balances in the brain. Is that my understanding of what you are suggesting that the studies are pointing to?
Gender expression is reliant on the hormonal on the brain. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that and I mentioned this last night, that I think that the argument you would be met with in this would be the actual. I know it's boring to talk about definitions, but the use of gender as a definition, as that being the instance, or based on what we culturally identify as being masculine typical or feminine typical traits in people's the way that they exhibit themselves. And I think that it's difficult to parse out a correlation. I can grant that, and I think most people will grant that there are correlations with those instances. I think the almost impossibility, the burden of proof coming to the realm of impossible to prove, is the causation of that, because we have societally such a history of enforcement of what we consider to be gendered stereotypes in people's action. And when it comes to being able to prove that a preborn child is able to understand gendered stereotypes, they can't understand physical experience yet. So that becomes when we're talking about definitions, the counter that I would see presented to this, or I would assume would be presented to this, is then we're working on fundamentally different definitions of what gender is. If you're trying to say that they're linked causally, correlation I feel like would be granted with this definition. Causation, I don't know what the burden of proof or the limitation would be on that. If someone was going to try and say, can you prove if in a perfect environment, hypothetically speaking, we had zero history of any kind of gendered society or culture, how would a person express themselves, and would it be considered a masculine or a feminine trait without the entirety of human history shaping those stereotypes, people living in gendered roles? And up until how long ago were women even allowed to vote, kind of a thing.
Sure,
in terms of
that's understandable. Sure, those are all things that could be made. But the main point of what I'm trying to say here is that gender and biological sex are not independent. They cannot be. They cannot be independent. So that is one thing I can say for sure. Gender and biological sex are not independent, and that is on the basis of, hey, you have prenatal hormonal exposure, male or female, generally male or female hormones, before you even enter the world. And that influences how your brain develops. And from there, then you get into the world and you can express yourself. Like there are a bunch of things that are not changeable. For example, one of the things that you can't change, and this is why conversion therapy is a big no, is that you can't change your sexual preference. Gay people, like if you are gay, you can't change that. That's not something you can change. There are other things you can't change as well. And while gender is how you feel and how you express yourself in terms of how you feel, that is related to your biological sex. It is not independent of your biological sex. It is not independent of your biological sex. And the idea that prenatal testosterone, there are studies on prenatal testosterone, does influence the way your brain grows and progresses and changes, substantiates that idea. It is 100% that these things are not independent.
I'm trying to find a definition of gender that, because it sounds like those are still arguments in favor of biological sex. And when I look up a definition of gender, the Oxford Languages definition, either of the two sexes, male or female, especially when considered with reference to social and cultural differences rather than biological ones. So that definition there is fundamentally different than what you're saying. When you're saying the definition of gender and the definition of sex are linked biologically, call it semantic, but the semantic definition that I'm looking up here and I don't know if it's a stipulative definition of something that has changed. So I can't say that, but it's that is looking like the distinction between the words is difference based off of societal and cultural differences rather than biological difference. And then I look at the next one. Gender is a range of characteristics pertaining to and differentiating between masculinity and femininity depending on context. These characteristics may include biological sex, sex-based social structures, or gender identity. So I think it feels like to me, I would have a hard time because nowhere in your statement there am I finding what the definition that's being used, and I'm not as familiar with Dr. Deborah. So I watched that video that you sent, which, by the way, the moderator is fucking hard to listen to. She was
great.
painful.
Yeah,
she was good. Awful. But sex research or gender is binary, not a social construct. It feels almost like a semantic disagreement.
Well, here's the thing. This is why it's important, because this is being substantiated into law. Right, so you have all these definitions and you have all these claims, and they're all vague, and there's nothing cemented. So
gender does seem like a much more vague definition. It sounds like a stipulative definition, which removes measurable context.
Exactly,
and is a word that is being utilized as one, at least to my best understanding, as a more broad term that is less based on something that we can point to. That almost seems to be the purpose of the word, though.
No. Well, maybe so, but then it cannot be put into the realm of law because that doesn't work.
Based on your same structure of anytime that you're going to do this, you have to have the fail point be low enough that it doesn't cause some sort of catastrophic.
You have to have a consistent, otherwise things get catastrophic. Otherwise things get chaotic. Like there's your fundamental whatever, we know about this and stuff, but
it makes it hard. It makes it hard to have conversations, which I think is what the basis of this will come down to.
But this goes further to say, like, this idea of gender is now substantiated in Bill C-16, and not only that, but it is also being taught in schools, in universities, and so on and so forth. And one of the things they're teaching is that gender is independent of biological sex, which based on these articles is not true. And secondly, gender is a spectrum. And I could go further into this. The idea that gender is a spectrum. Well, first of all, there's male and female. Intersex is somewhere in between. That's where it originally came from. You either have a quality of one, the other, or a little bit of both. So it's still binary, no matter where you put yourself on the spectrum or on the in between. So what the idea of gender as a spectrum, what they're saying is, like, there's gender identities such as non-binary. There are gender identities such as trans, like the more standard ones, trans male to female, or then there's the detransitioners. Like there's a bunch of different groups, which is again shown in the Facebook, the 71 different Facebook genders, which is hard enough to keep track of itself. But then there's other genders on top of that, such as what I'm trying not to say dragonkin.
Thought you were gonna say the moon gender that she used in her
Yeah. There's
example.
arbor gender, which is I identify as a tree, and then there is moon gender, which means my gender only comes out at night. That's the thing. My gender.
I wanna follow up on that. That sounds so not good faith when she said that. It sounded like a thing. She's like, "That's a real thing," and I need to look that up before I grant.
Hey,
That's a
look it up.
thing that people actually,
that is
because when someone says my gender only comes out at night, that almost sounds like identify as an attack helicopter, which I would use as the example of somebody who is making the ad absurdum fallacy of like, well, it's gonna dogs are gonna start dating cats and the water's gonna turn the frogs gay. It just sounds like so much of a ridiculous thing. It's like that's not even the same conversation. But
yes, but that's the thing. That's fine when it's on an individual level, but that is substantiated into law. So if you say I identify as moon gender and you're like, you're joking, you're technically transphobic. That is technically a thing. That is now substantiated into law. You can be moon gender. That is something you can be. And that doesn't even make sense because it's not like that. That's not how gender works. It is not independent of biological sex. And it is not a spectrum. It is binary. You're one or the other, or you're somewhere in between. It is not moon gender. It is not arbor gender.
One or the other, somewhere in between it would be the spectrum. So I don't think.
No, because the difference between a man and a woman is not a tree or a moon. Or whatever it is. Like they're adding in category. It's like
it's like here's the spectrum, man, woman, somewhere in between. Over here is tree.
Yes,
or dragonkin.
And that's what they're saying. They're saying that
you're
saying
women, it's an expansion beyond like a different axis almost of the spectrum.
Yeah, exactly. That is what I'm saying. So the problem here is this has been substantiated into law, Bill C-16. The second problem is they are teaching this to children. So there's something called the gender bred man and the gender unicorn. And I have those in the documents as well, Kerchak, if you want to pull them up. And they are definitely targeted towards children. And it's the ideas that I just said are unscientific. So
your concern there, as I understand it,
yes,
is that we are taking stuff that is not completely parsed out and
no, it's not. It's not that it's not completely parsed out.
It's not a consensus. It's not a scientific
consensus.
It's been
disproven. It has been disproven. This is not true, and it's being taught. It's not just that it's not a consensus. It's that this has been debunked. This is not true. It's like me going and teaching like your kids. Let's say you have kids. Me and teaching your kids that I don't know, fire isn't hot. It's like no, that's not how that works. You can't do that. You are misleading children. You are being irresponsible and teaching something that is actually not true.
Trying to think of one of my goals here is to try and find the most defensible version of your argument.
So I'll give you another example of what is being taught and propagated. There was a study that this is a lot of people who defend the activism, the trans activism go to. There's a study that says male and female brains are a mosaic of qualities, and they aren't actually very differentiable. They have this study, and it was done.
Sent me last night, right?
This was done. Yes, I sent you both versions, and this was sensationalized by the media. This was sensationalized by the media. The study was then redone, and what it found was that no, you actually can reliably differentiate a male brain from a female brain and vice versa, and that was not covered by the media at all. I've sent you both of these studies, and I've sent you. So there's all this stuff where it's like an infiltration of science, and we can talk about this more too if you want, but I want to give you a chance to look at this first. But it's
Mhm.
yeah. The study one says male and female brains exist along a mosaic and actually aren't very different. Study two reassessed the study and found that you can tell a male brain from a female brain at a rate much higher than chance. Uh, Media only promoted study one and did not cover the second study at all. And there's articles that explain this very well. The limitations of the first study, why it was short-sighted, why it wasn't accommodating for this, and how they differed in it was a little bit like weird with the results. Um, so furthermore to that, defending biology nowadays gets you called a sexist, a misogynist, or transphobic. None of the gender identity labels are based on science at all. Gender non-binary, gender neutral, agender, pangender, gender fluid, gender free, moon gender. All these labels mean you identify as either, both, or neither. Male, female, or neither. But it's not based on any, like, moon gender is not scientific. There's a lot of genders that aren't
Yeah, I think we should
scientific.
move away. I know we
We
should
can
we
move
should move
away.
away from
So
those ones
let
because
me
I do
finish
think
this.
that does, yeah, that just sounds absurdist. Like, to even, and I'm still not it when she said it in the lecture, it almost sounded like
Yeah.
I would feel more comfortable even including it in the conversation if I saw anybody or any actual instances of someone claiming, and I can't ascribe to their intention, but claiming unironically to be a tree or to be the, I've literally never seen that
Yeah.
happen,
But this
and
is
so I need to
where
find at least but I need to find an instance of it
Okay,
before
so
I can grant that that's a
this is
realistic
where
argument to give.
remember when we had this conversation where you're like, okay, we got to do our research so that this stuff doesn't happen, to where we come to an impasse and we don't have the research done. So I'll say,
Right,
okay,
but
I didn't.
I'm just saying let's stick on the other stuff as opposed to the moon or the tree, because I even in your research I'm not finding anywhere where you found someone. I found that you saw someone who said this is a real thing, but I haven't seen anything there, and I
Then I would
can't
have to look more
find
because
it.
I did not delve
Right,
specifically into that area. So then I'll continue with the points and say less
right.
than 1% identify as transgender. This less than 1% of people identify as transgender, not intersex, but transgender. The number has doubled over the last 10 years. So, one thing that Planned Parenthood had said recently is anatomy is not male or female, it just is, which is not true. And it's transphobic to believe otherwise. And then they went further to say adults in the room might not understand this, and children, it is the children's job to re educate them, which I think is quite fucked up. That is a Planned Parenthood uh, uh, statement. Pediatricians, so this is infiltrated the medical industry as well. The child medical industry. And here's one of the problems with it is, well, I'll talk about this after, but there's a pediatrician, the Canadian Pediatric Society released this article. It's a caringforkids.cps that's there. It has the genderbread man, the gender unicorn, and what it says is these gender expression is not. They're propagating the unscientific ideas I just said, and also debunked as well. And so what it seems like, and this was what it would seem like to me, and this is independent of research. I do agree with this concept, is that there is, and I've talked to you about this before, there are people that are trendy or jump on trains or fads or bandwagons. This happens all the time, especially with kids when they're trying to figure out who they are. They experiment, they go here, they go there, they go do this, they go do that. Drugs, all of these things, they go through phases and so on and so forth. And so the doubling of the people that identify as transgender, while a lot of people would argue that, hey, it's because they're feeling more accepted or willing to explore this path for themselves, I see it as more often than not a social contagion. And there are contributing factors. Like in a lot of these children that identify as transgender, a bunch of them have autism, borderline personality disorder, or some type of trauma. So they're trying to figure out a way to belong or navigate these things, and because of that, they're like, "Oh, I'm transgendered," which I don't think is true. But that idea is more incentivized and popularized by things like the unscientific values that are being pushed forward or published in the pediatrics section of the Canadian Pediatric Society. And not only that, but it gets worse because therapists and doctors are too scared to push back. You can lose your livelihood from pushing back against this idea. There's something called Bill 77, which states any kind of questioning of gender identity is equated to conversion therapy. And so you can lose your license, your medical license for conversion therapy. So they're equating those two things, which they are not, generally asking you questions about gender dysphoria. I don't think is necessarily conversion therapy. However, there are cases here. There's a case right here, the OLA link, Parliament Session 1, Bill 77.
What page are you on in your document for that?
6. Yeah.
Okay,
And so what I'm saying here is that children are being used as pawns to further this movement. And I do think, and Douglas Murray has said this too, that in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years, however it takes, people will look back in shame at what we did, because it's saying, hey, kid, here's all this stuff, run with it. And then some kids are being put on hormone blockers. Some people are being put on puberty blockers. Some people are doing this and that, or getting the surgery. And hormone blockers aren't harmless, or I can't remember exactly what it is. But there are consequences to these things. Like cross hormone exposure often will lead to sterilization. So you can't have kids anymore after experiencing these things. And all of this information, if you talk about it or you present it, you are considered transphobic. And in terms of the medical industry and the medical fields, a lot of doctors just will not even touch these issues. They will avoid them, because if they go in and say, hey, I don't think this is right, they are likely to lose their license, their practice, their livelihood. That's how bad it's gotten. So I think this is a terrible thing. I think Bill C-16 and things surrounding it are a terrible thing. And so let me clarify my position, because I feel like you might want to do that for me. My position is, hey, if you are transgender and you are, just generally like, hey, I'm transgendered, this is how I am, I was a male, I was born in the wrong body, so now I'm female, whatever, you should have equal rights. All the compassion in the world, do whatever you want. I don't care. I'm not speaking against that. I'm speaking against the trans activism that does not necessarily act in the best interests of the transgendered community. There's a lot of trans activism going on, and it has proliferated to areas such as Bill C-16, children education programs, university education programs, and so on and so forth. And I will not advocate for that, and I can explain why. But it's not that I'm against transgendered people at all. Hey, all power to them. Good for you. You want to transition and live a life as a male or a female when you're an adult? Go for it. Great. I'll talk to you. I'll hang out with you. Everything's good. But the people that are substantiating unscientific values into children, or using children as guinea pigs, or the movements that are doing that, I cannot agree with. And I think that's utterly reprehensible, irresponsible, and terrible. And I do not see how other people do not see that, unless they're just ignorant of the ideas and facts that are being presented.
I think that is your position.
Good enough.
I think something else with, like, in regards to the entire conversation, something that seems to be a through line, and something that I know that or I believe to be a position you hold, is part of the frustration, and it came up in that where you said you can't even talk about these things.
You can't.
I think.
Yeah.
Well, I think an articulation of your position on that is a lot of the frustration that you have is whether or not we would come to some sort of scientific conclusion, because that's what science does. We examine things, and if we come to a better, more supported, evidence-based position, then we're supposed to change our perspective to fit that new model. That's how science works. That is the scientific method that we test and we retest and we test different hypotheses. The ones that we can support with evidence, we hold those to be our best understanding until we find something that is better. That's what science is. It's not holding on to a pre-existing idea of something. It's being able to burn that away and say, I no longer believe this thing because I found evidence that is better supporting this other position. And that is how someone who is scientifically minded should process things. I think that
Yes,
your
but it has to be based on
concern.
facts and data and discernible.
That's what I mean by
Yeah,
like
yeah.
evidence-based
Yes,
of we're
yes.
talking about a scientific. But what I think your concern is, and what seems to be the main core of this, is that it makes it impossible for us to continue refining with scientific approaches if you cannot even approach a subject. The idea that something is off limits to even discuss if you lose your practice, or you're not going to be able to, or you lose your funding for research, if it's even about the topic.
Mm-hmm.
By saying that because this topic is beyond discussion, and I think that's where a lot of your frustration comes from, is we can't even talk about this, because if we talked about it and I was presented with compelling evidence if you found out, because a good way to have a conversation, this is something that I always try to use as an example, is can I restate your position in a way that you would agree with?
I
I
agree
think
with
this
that,
has been an exercise of that for me. And then the second part of having a productive conversation is trying to provide what someone's reasonable evidence would be for them to change their mind. I always use the Apple example.
Uh-huh.
If you held a claim, if I said, okay, Faraaz, my understanding is that your claim is you're saying that all apples are red. And you said, yes, all apples are red.
Yes.
And I said, what would I need to present to you for you to change your mind if I came out with a green apple and I said, look at this apple, do you still hold on to that pre-held belief? If you said, yes, if you showed me a green apple, then I would add that into my worldview. I would progress my position to facilitate that. Or that's a conversation that would be constructive and useful, and we can have that conversation. But if you said no, even if you showed me a green apple, I would say, I don't. That wouldn't be enough. Would tell you that all apples are red, because that's like an almost an absurd argument. But when it comes to these sorts of things, the question then would be what, and I think the biggest counter to that, what would be something that would need to be shown to you that would change that position? If I could, if a study came out that said actually this there is zero negative connotations or association with a puberty blocker or a hormone blocker, we're saying delaying someone's puberty by 2 years has zero negative measurable effects.
Yep.
That would be the example. But again, I think your main issue is that we can't even have that conversation, because you're not even allowed to process that and think about that, because if you start talking about it, then the idea of like, hey, we shouldn't talk about this, which you and I have run into plenty of times, where we'll be streaming and we'll start going down a road and like, hey, we probably shouldn't talk about this at the risk of misspeaking or falling into that stipulative definition of some sort of phobia or ism that would cause a
I could curate just stand in on the medical side of things when it comes to like hormone blockers and things like that. But before I do that, there's been a few interrogations as to if we go back to gender is not independent of biology. There were a few interrogations as regards to intersex. They would like you to clarify.
What do I need to clarify? Kerchak?
Yeah, one sec. I'm just reading through.
Is it how do I explain intersex individuals? Is that what it is?
I'll read the question out loud. Ivan was a bit worried that the clarification on the earlier gender is tied to sex argument you did could have been misunderstood as you claiming that it's exclusively 2 points, like male and female, so not really mentioning intersex too much.
No, there is intersex, but that intersex is less than 1% of the population. So while there is male and female and intersex is a combination of male and female. That's what it is. You have both reproductive tissues or something like that. That would be correct, wouldn't it, Kerchak?
It would be a plethora of things, actually. The condition itself regroups a large quantity of different characteristics. So you'll have, let me pull this page up. Because there's a spectrum of intersex.
Mhm.
There are many, many different conditions.
Mhm.
Let's see. So there's congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which is one. Testosterone biosynthetic defects, androgen insensitivity syndrome is one. Gonadal dysgenesis. There's a bunch. Micropenis is one, off of others.
That sucks.
Yeah,
Okay.
but there are many different. I can link you the picture
So
here.
I will say here that look, I would have to look at all these and just to basically understand what Kerchak's talking about. But my original, it doesn't necessarily change my original, what I said originally, that there is male and there's female for 90%, 99% of the people in terms of sex, and then there's intersex for less than 1% of the population. So that doesn't necessarily mean there is a third gender or a third sex or anything like that. That means it's male and female, and intersex is something in between. Intrasex, it's something in between. It doesn't speak to the presence of a new sex. It's a combination of the two. Kerchak?
Yeah, I'm just waiting to see if the question was answered or
Okay,
not.
we can answer these questions after because we do have to get through more stuff.
Gotcha.
Work.
Also to state, this isn't the only time we can have a conversation. The idea too is like this isn't a one-time thing where we can never talk about. I mean, Reb's made this overlay and everything for us. So like if we don't get to something, or if there's continued education that Faraaz and I can continue to do about certain things and further educate ourselves to discuss these topics and stuff, this is something that we could do in the future. Just as a clarification for people that are worrying if I don't get my question answered now or addressed right now, that I'll never be able to, that this won't ever happen. So
Yeah, and okay, so I remember what I was talking about after. So we will touch on more stuff if you guys would like us to later on. But as in terms of which doctors have lost their jobs or which people have lost their cases the result of or in relation to this trans activism or Bill C-16, there's a doctor named Dr. David Makareth, who is a Christian doctor, and he fought his case, lost his case, and now is trying to fight an appeal. I believe I have the article there. I'd have to relook at it again, but his claim that biological gender is not independent from biological sex, or one of the claims I've made today, and that people are teaching unscientific things, is what led to the case. So there's one. There's also a guy named Barry Newfield who is stating that parts of the curriculum that teach gender is fluid and untethered from biological sex are unscientific theories. So he was in the school board system, and he's getting like there's all this controversy around that too. Now, these are things that people have said that are true, that they are getting taken out for. Now, in the case of a doctor in the US who there was a case, and so I don't have research here. I forgot to get this article. I meant to get this article, but I forgot to get it. And if I looked for it, or maybe Kerchak, you can look for it, you might be able to find it. But there was a doctor who was investigating. Someone came to them, a child, and they had gender dysphoria. And so the doctor, before applying treatment or anything like that, decided to investigate the causes for this dysphoria. See, hey, is this what you think it is? So on and so forth. And that doctor lost their job. They lost their entire practice. Kerchak, you would have to find that for me if we want to continue with it. And that
An example of a doctor losing their job because they prescribed some kind of further analysis into the dysphoria itself. Yeah.
you found it, or you are looking for it?
That's what you're asking me, basically.
Yes,
I'm just
yes.
clarifying.
I'm looking for that. Yes. And so that is set as the precedent for other doctors. And this is anecdotal next because I don't have evidence of this, but it is said now that doctors are either they don't want to go against their moral obligation that they feel deep down to say, hey, this isn't true. So what they do is they just avoid cases with gender dysphoric children. And so why I say children are being treated as guinea pigs is not because I'm saying they can't express themselves, but what I'm saying is on top of the expression of themselves, they're being given, well, it's like an inaccurate representation of the surgery, because it's like if a doctor's like, hey, don't do this, you're transphobic, you lose your practice. So that's an inaccurate representation of what the doctor thinks. They are required to say, to keep their job, okay, let's put you through the steps. Let's get you into this system of puberty blockers, hormone blockers, so on and so forth. And those things are not inconsequential, nor are people very informed about them either. Like the parents are probably not informed about these things either, because one of the consequences, as I said earlier, about cross hormonal exposure is sterilization at the very least. So you don't give a child sexual consent in I think the West until they're 16. Yet you are taking children as young as 3 years old and subjecting them to hormonal treatment to change their sex. That doesn't make sense. That's why I say they're being used as guinea pigs, because they are unaware of what they're actually going to go through or do to themselves. And this is substantiated or whatever you say by policies that say you cannot show them the whole picture. You cannot explore. You cannot deviate from the plan. If they ask for it, you have to do it. Otherwise, you're transphobic and you will lose your practice.
So criticism coming from you, as I best understand it, is the idea that because, again, it comes down to the idea of being able to even investigate this further. It's almost being before being fully supported by the scientific community, and you are even saying is at odds with scientific consensus.
Yes.
That these things are being implemented to the point where since we can no longer have the conversations and do the research and do these studies, it's seen as an immoral action to even do that, and so people are being forced to follow through with stuff that may or may not, and in your opinion is compellingly evidenced to not be helpful or even is actively harmful, especially as it applies to children.
It can be very actively harmful. Yes.
And then to add something that might seem tangential, but I think it's important when we talk about things like age of consent law. It's not about how, when we talk about those, the reason that those laws exist, it's not because someone's actual physiological age is the limiting factor. It's we're usually talking about someone's cognitive or developmental ability to make long-term decisions as someone who is underdeveloped. So when we think about permanent decisions, and so when we talk about age of consent, why can't an adult be sexually active with a minor? Why do we even have those laws in place? It's because we as a society have decided that the mental development and the emotional development of children up to a certain age is volatile enough that we can't trust consistently that they can make choices in their best behavior. And then you have things like power dynamics involved when it comes to older and younger individuals engaging in those actions. But you can apply that same logic to what you're saying in as a contradiction in legislation, saying, why is it that we don't trust kids to be able to make decisions on their sexual activity until they are of a certain age, while we would be allowing kids and then enforcing it to where we pressure doctors to also be allowing children who are in the same age range to be able to make these long-term things that do have long-term effects that can include things like developmental delay and or sterilization, lack of being able to do future things. So long-term life effects And so it's your position in this, as I understand it, is we need to continue being able to have these conversations, think critically about it, and improve our understanding and share that understanding with scientific communities instead of shutting down the conversation, and also apply similar legislative thought towards children and their families making decisions about things like uh, puberty blockers and pre-pubescent transitional steps, when we would not grant the same kind of agency towards those children when it comes to making something like sexual
Yes.
decisions as well.
Yeah, you do not give children tools that are beyond their grasp. So, for example, you've heard it's been many people will say, "God, fuck, I was a kid. I was so stupid. I can't believe I did that." And that's because
To be fair, I hear a lot of adults say that too, but
yeah,
yes.
tons of people say that. And that's fair. That's okay. That's a natural process. You have to make mistakes. Now, when one of the mistakes you can make actively and easily becomes permanent and irreversible, that is not very acceptable. That does not seem logical or justifiable under any means at all. So, hey, if you're an adult and you want to transition, great, go for it, whatever. Good for you. But if you're a child between the age of 3, 12, 15, 16, probably no, as you get older, sure. But no. I see that as predatory. I see that as terrible. I see that as prioritizing the rights of a movement over the individual lives of children. And I do not think it is a good thing at all. I think it's very shameful behavior. The next thing I want to say about that is it's not only allowing children to do this, there are cases, and again, I would have to get the articles, or maybe Kerchak can do this. And Kerchak, you can just post these in chat too if you would like. You don't have to just give it to us there. But
Yeah, that was the article in question of the medical practitioner that was fired over.
yes, thank you for getting that. So yeah, just post that in either one of our chats or both. And then there's the next thing of parents. There have been cases here, so maybe Kerchak, you could find this too. Parents have lost cases against their spouses or against whatever there is, in terms of the gender identity of their kid. So the kid said, "Hey, I am a girl." Parent has refused to call them a girl, and then they have lost custody of that child. So it's not just, and Kerchak, maybe you can look that up too. It's not just their children are allowed to do this. It is if they say anything about this, then they are they're put on a very easy path to it where it's actually hard, where the child actually has to say like, no, this isn't best for me. They no longer have to listen to their parents or experts on the matter or doctors even. It's all the barriers that would be in place to say, hey, don't do this thing that can permanently change you, yet are no longer in place. It's much easier to do those things, and we don't allow that in anywhere else with as such dangerous tools. It's mandated behavior. It's not good. Make sense? I need to urinate.
I mean, that is your position.
So if you want to expand on
that
that,
feels like it's it. No,
I
I
will
don't
be
have
right
much.
back.
I mean, I think I understand your position. I think that's about as it
I
is.
can't hear you. Keep going.
I don't. Okay. Oh.
Well, there is a case here of this happened in British Columbia of a mother suing their 17-year-old, the doctor of the 17-year-old, the surgeon in question, over consent when it came to let me read here.
Is this the one you just linked in the Discord?
No, that's a doctor that lost his job. Actually, he's a psychologist who lost his job. I can't really find anything as to like what pertains to the age, but it feels like 16 is the actual consensus as to when hormone therapy should be started.
Are you familiar at all, Kerchak, with so like not necessarily hormone therapy in terms of beginning hormone transitions, but with things like puberty blockers, or is that not something you've got much familiarity with?
Not so much, but I can probably do some research because I am
That
interested.
Yeah, I'm also curious about that. That's been one of the arguments that I've seen pushed, or that I've seen given when it comes to, okay, sure, we wouldn't give a child transitional hormone therapy before a certain age, but if someone is really pushing the idea of having puberty blockers, delaying that process, having fewer side effects, I can't speak to potential side effects of that. That is an argument that I've seen given as saying, okay, well, we're not going to encourage prepubescent uh, transitions in terms of someone actually going through hormone therapy, but we can delay the puberty, which in that argument they said is shown to have fewer long-term negative side effects if someone opts out and says, you know what, actually, no, I don't want to go with this
Well,
direction.
see,
It just delays their puberty a little bit, but I don't have any kind of
right.
research consensus to be able to push back. But if part of my goal here is to try and present, you know, alternative perspectives to give as, you know, as something for us to either consider or push against, or sharpen his own positions, I always want to give the best reasonable position in opposition to his, so at least that he's been made aware of that, as opposed to just saying, like, you know, without any kind of pushback. But I still need to clarify my own understanding of that as well.
This is
Okay.
true, but when it comes to medicine and consent is very important. And when we talk
Mm-hmm.
about age and when we talk about consent, the idea of consent has to be well informed. How well informed can someone of like an age
Prepubescent age
below
be.
right can be?
Yeah.
And
Right.
that's the major point of argument, I
Well,
guess.
I think that the follow up for the major point of argument that they would say is the risk associated with a puberty blocker would be lower
Mhm.
than actual hormone therapy. And so you can say, like, hey, your informed consent is, this just delays the point where you have to make a decision, because transitioning after puberty is going to be, you're going to have more, if you, let's say you're a male transitioning to female, you're going to have more masculine traits that happen through that. You know, you're going to go through male puberty and then try to transition afterwards. It would be a lot more difficult than before that process. You're a little bit more malleable prepubescently, and if someone could present, that would be the green apple right there, right? If I could show someone a position of saying, hey, if there was the thing you took instead of hormone therapy, there was, you know, a male using estrogen or a female using testosterone. If you delayed that so that the choice could be made at a time when you could give informed consent, with limiting, you know, what would the and I believe when Faraz and I have mentioned this in the past, he said there's no way to possibly know how catastrophic something like that could be, even if you didn't have some sort of medical physiological effect associated with it. There's all sorts of other developmental effects that could happen, and I don't have an argument for it because I'm not in the field.
Okay.
But I think that would be the green apple
So
of
one thing I want to do quick is I am running out of time, but I want to touch on two more things before
Go ahead.
we have to end this.
Yep.
And to conclude this point about the hormone blockers, the transitioning and stuff like that, we can go into it at a different date. But one thing I did do is I ordered the book, The End of Gender: Debunking the Myths About Sex and Identity in Our Society. I posted that in the Discord as well. It's by Dr. Deborah So, where she goes through all the different studies and debunks the common myths that aren't well covered. So I'll post it. I'll post it in chat too. I'm getting this tomorrow. I will read it when I have time, and it will. You know, I can't recommend it or not recommend it because I haven't read it, but it will further my discussion ability on these topics. So on this topic specifically. So I will be doing that. The next thing, oh, look, the audiobook is up. Oh, yeah, audiobook just came out. Cool. If we conclude that topic for now, I know it's not concluded and we can touch on it later, but if we conclude it for now,
This is an ongoing conversation that
Yeah.
like this isn't, we're gonna have continued thoughts and stuff.
just for the sake of things, is the next part I want to touch on is the catastrophic nature of this. Because often people will say, "Oh, I just don't see it. I just don't see how this could be a bad thing or a terrible thing. It's just a small thing. You're just changing. You're just expressing your pronouns, or you're just, not being discriminatory towards a group or whatever." And that's why I really want to touch on.
You want to touch on the societal effects, not the individual experience of what would happen if a child that doesn't have. That you have nothing to do with this person, you'll never interact with them. Their existence in your life is nothing. What is different and making this not a personal thing, like someone who decides to. Why would it be societally frustrating or upsetting for people that are gay to get married? We accept that as a society. It's these people's lives. Let them live it. What is the difference with this for you?
Yes.
That's the distinction you're going to make.
That's one thing, and I want to end with that point because I think it's one of the most important things. What I want to touch on before that is that Bill C-16 does not even necessarily do what it sets out, what it says it sets out to do. And that actually applies to a lot of the trans activist movement as well. I say trans activists specifically. There are many cases shown where the policies that are being put forth or the loud and proud activism that has been taking place is not appealing to the trans community. And so I have a few articles here. Kerchak, if you see them, I haven't done a lot of research in this section, so I'm not well versed here. But one thing that isn't super covered is the idea that these movements are offensive to women. So there's radical feminists and feminist groups that are very opposed to a lot of the things being passed and pushed on. For example, they consider it identity theft. So, for example, one of the things being said is like, if there's a trans woman, you can't call her a trans woman. You have to call her a woman. You give her that term. And that doesn't apply to women because now they're labeled as cis women, whereas trans women are labeled as women. So this is one of the things that the feminists push back against. I'm not saying that this is my perspective, but this is a perspective that is more common. Not only that, but they are saying that men are identifying as women and they are taking away women's rights. So what you said earlier about the whole idea of the rape counselor, generally that would be something that would be reserved for a woman to be in a position of. But now technically transgendered women can be rape counselors with these new policies. And so a tactic that I do believe is being taken on, and it fits with the whole narrative of suppression of speech, is that they want 2 + 2 to equal 5. And obviously it doesn't. But if enough people say 2 + 2 is equal to 5, then all of a sudden it's magically true. And you can see this happening in Twitter, on everywhere, in communication, in science, in academia, everywhere people are conforming to this idea. And it's not good because it's not good for that reason, but it doesn't even speak to the wants of the trans community, because there have been cases. There's a case here where a trans person at I believe it was UBC burned a pride flag. I have this article here. And when asked, why did you burn the pride flag? They said, before all of this loud and proud activism, I could walk down the streets and people would be like, hey, how are you, miss or ma'am or anything like that. And now it's very different. That's not the case anymore. And they were very frustrated with it, that these activists' agendas are actually making them less comfortable in society, not more comfortable. And another example is the pronoun thing. And I've had a problem with this since, I've had a problem with this. The normalization of expressing your pronouns, or the normalization of putting your pronouns in Twitter, or the normalization of having conversations and declaring your pronouns. So you say, like an example Lindsay Shepherd cited was that, okay, you have a conversation with someone, you say, "Hi, my name is John. I prefer his, her pronouns. How about you?" And that was something
His,
that,
him, probably.
did I say his, him? Or did I
His,
say
her.
his, her?
Because if someone
His,
said,
him.
"Hey, my name's John. I prefer his, her," I would actually be like, "That
Yeah.
was information I probably did need." If that's
Yeah,
counted
yeah,
to. Yeah,
So
but
there,
yeah.
that's an example that was pushed forth by something. Oh fuck, there's more cases I missed. Kerchak, well, I'll ask you after. But that's an example, and trans people will actually, when asked, not all of them, of course, but there are trans people who will say, "Hey, I don't want my pronouns to be the first thing you talk about," because then before it was like, "Oh, I am a girl," and you see that and you acknowledge me as that. Now it's like, "Oh, I'm a they them," or I identify as a girl, and it becomes a lot more obvious and a lot more uncomfortable. So the normalization of pronouns, for a lot of people, they're just going along with the trend, and for the actual effects on the trans community, um, at least members of the trans community are not as intended. And because of that, you can say, okay, well, then why are you normalizing pronouns? And so what I can say, I can see, and this is again, what I see is that it is virtue signaling, and it is a way to belong in a place where you are alone. It is picking sides. It's not actually about the trans people. The trans activists are not actually necessarily about the trans community, and this is a very dangerous thing. One, so that point is that, hey, the policies that are in place and you are supporting blindly or informed do not necessarily actually benefit the trans community. And it has been shown in multiple occasions. Loud and proud activism, normalization of this, normalization of that is not necessarily what they want, but it is more so, more often than not, substantiated by people who want to signal their virtue and belong. That's what I see from that. What would you say, Ben Rice? Oh, Kenneth Zucker, yeah. Kerchak, one thing I wanted to ask you to research was the case where children were taken away for I can't remember if it was believing or not believing in the Easter Bunny. It was one of the two, but it shows a precedent that can be applied to this stuff, if you don't mind.
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
If you want to
move
mention
to
it, that? Well, I was going to say when it comes to that, I think in general that position's pretty clear for you.
Yeah.
Potential weakness being that it is largely anecdotal, right? Of saying like it based on what I'm seeing here, I'm recognizing that these that the trans activism of the normalization of pronoun inclusion in people's introductions seems anecdotally to actually alienate some people. And I can even add an anecdote to that. I know a prolific content creator, ContraPoints, who is openly, she did her entire transition on YouTube. She started off making videos as a man, and her entire transition over the last few years as a content creator on YouTube to being probably one of the most prolific people in the space, made a tweet talking about some dysphoria feelings they get triggered or when going into trans inclusive spaces, as opposed to, she said, I can go to a bar in the South and everyone calls me miss or ma'am, and I never have anecdotally have never experienced being misgendered in these places. But then I go to a trans inclusive space and everyone sits down in a circle and says, okay, we're going to start by going over our pronouns. And she said that when I'm the only trans person there, it always feels targeted towards me. So I can say that I've seen people share that experience. And so in terms of, because I believe that's what you're referring to, is that a lot of these sorts of things is actually not in service to the people that it's meant to, but it's more in service to people with the idea of signaling a virtue of look how woke and supportive I am, which I don't think that's consciously what people are doing. Like the Ben opinion is, and why I have less of a problem with it than you do, is I'm not necessarily reading that as virtue signaling, but I'll slip back into the Faraaz of like, that's whether you mean to or not, that's what you're doing, and you're adhering to this, and it's becoming a part of your identity. And the not slippery slope fallacy, but an actual slippery slope of when we start to normalize these sorts of things, then it becomes, you're not even doing what is meant to be happen. You're not even doing what the intended goal is of the movement, and it's an overreaction to this thing to accommodate to a smaller percentage of the societal population, and it limits discourse and makes it worse, or it makes it difficult for us to continue to have conversations. And some people being more accommodating in this way is more what's, I think your biggest concern in that is it starts with a C.
Complacency?
Not complacent. Not complacent. No. What the big issue with not speaking out about X term and just going with it?
Conforming?
Maybe conforming to a societal thing. It was the big concern that you had about the blindness, the blind playthrough
It's
tag as well. It's compliant.
compliance.
It's just that you're just being compliant. You're establishing blind compliance. Oh, that's ironic. First playthrough compliance of where you're just doing something because you're being told from some sort of authority figure that this is just what we do now without being able to have the conversation. I think that's the through line of the entire thing. Being told to do a certain thing without being able to decide for yourself, think critically, and then even have conversations.
Exactly.
That seems to be the through line for all of this.
Yes, it's terribly catastrophic, and I'll go into why. So we'll leave that point behind because I only have so much time. So this is from where is it here? Macareth, Barbara K. And this goes into why I think it's so dangerous. So a lot of people will say, "Oh, I just don't see it. I just don't see it. I don't see how this could be such a big deal. Oh, we're more accepting. We're more open to different ideologies and things like that. And even if I don't understand this myself, I am expressing it because I am more accepting." I've heard this everywhere. And what people don't realize is the price for this. And so the loss of freedom of speech is totalitarian. The First Amendment in the U.S., where is it? Somewhere around here.
First pages.
Which page?
First pages.
It's the first pages.
I think 4.
First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The free speech thing there is very, very important because the lack of free speech is a totalitarian idea, and totalitarian regimes do not end well. There's murder, there's massacre, there's been no totalitarian regime that has been referenced as like, oh, this is a good thing, ever. And so what is happening right now, and this is quoted as an excerpt from John F. Furdy in 2011, is something called velvet totalitarianism. And this is how he defined it. So velvet totalitarianism is the presence of uninterpretable laws. That's number one. There's no objective metric for defining alleged offense. And that's in line with the feelings, the subjective feelings. There's no objective metric. It's very hard to define these things. So it's uninterpretable in a way. Second, the presence of power of unqualified experts. So in the Soviet Union, there are commissars, and now there are equity officers in university who often have no higher education or academic accreditation, yet they pontificate accreditation. Sorry, thank you. Accreditation. Yet they pontificate of matters of nature of the curriculum or hiring faculty. So that's number 2. Number 3, status-defined ethics. Totalitarian. Imprisonment or torture is permitted for capitalists or Zionistic conspirators. So you can imprison or torture these people in a totalitarian regime. Nowadays, you're allowed to discriminate against non-white. You're allowed to discriminate against white heterosexual males. That is an okay group to attack. Ben Rice, in a lot of ways, and you see it happen all the time. And they have to even subjugate and say, yes, I'm privileged, I accept that, and so on and so forth. That's a totalitarian idea, the status-defined ethics. Next, there's fear of engaging in public discussion, and I think with the 20 disclaimers we spoke of this time and the talk we had yesterday and leading up to this, we can say there is substantial fear.
There is absolutely a chance that if the wrong person decided that this conversation was not up to their liking, that both Faraaz and I could lose our partnership and stuff, or complete channels. It would be possible.
And then there's the demonization. Lastly, there's the demonization of those perceived as ideological dissidents. So if you don't agree with this, we hate you. We cancel you. And you can see this in a lot of different places. Oh, you don't think that, for example, I'm not saying this is the case so I don't get canceled. You don't think a trans woman is a woman? Oh, well, fuck you. You're out. You lose your job. You're garbage, right? There's all of these things. So this is considered velvet totalitarianism. And this is a bad sign, because what happens in the totalitarian regimes, we know what happens. Things do not go well, right? And that is why free speech, one of the reasons why free speech is so important, and why the expression of your ideas and the expression of who you are is so important, and why compelled speech is a terrible thing, regardless of what it is. And the idea that it has been put into law is just as fucked up. It's a terrible thing that it's been put into law. So I can continue on that, or would you like to say something?
Quickly, totalitarianism is relating to a system of government that is centralized and dictatorial, or like has a dictator, and requires complete subservience to the state. So an idea, the most concerning or the most relatable thing, I think, in that definition of the velvet totalitarianism is the fact that it's not strongly defined, the fact that it is kind of by its own very nature ambiguous in terms of what it is. And I think that's an echoed concern that you have. If you're going to be legislating something, we're going to be putting the enforcement of law behind any particular thing, and if you can't show the rate of success or failure to be at a high enough level, then the risk involved in that. And that's what he meant when like there is a chance that, if the wrong person or with bad intention viewed what we were doing as being actively harmful, even discussing the ideas, you could, certain terms of service are relatively ambiguous, and I believe that we're doing everything in good faith and trying to not diminish anybody, and to be fair and open about our credentials, and even having the conversations, but there's always a risk.
There's always risk, yeah. So there is that. So, and I that's why I say it's catastrophic, because where do you think these things progress to? Not where they are right now, but where do they progress to? And the second thing I'll say about that, and this is what people just do not even accommodate the possibility for, is that the people that put these policies into place or push these movements, not all of them, but there are definitely some, know exactly what they're doing, and they have an agenda of controlling the speech. not of helping the trans people. This is just the medium for them to control the speech. And so there are indications of this everywhere. For example, one of the things with Bill C-16 is that its policy now, this isn't just related to the bill, this is just a government policy, I think since 2009 or something like that, that you need to do a gender-based analysis on everything that is passed to see the effects it has, because not all effects that are good for men will be good for women, and vice versa. So there's a group of feminists in Quebec, and there's other groups as well that have been trying to get access to the gender-based analysis done on Bill C-16, which is public record. So you should be able to get it within a week, a couple days. And for reference, I think they asked for something else. They got it within 3 days. The gender-based analysis on Bill C-16 has not been given to them for 2 years. Not only that, but there was an individual, I can't remember her name, but I have the video here. It's one of the top ones, Kerchak. You can link that if you want, where the individual went and talked to all different members of parliament to see if they can get their hands on the gender-based analysis. And every single person within 3 days either didn't respond or said, no, I'm not touching that. No, I am not touching that. And it's a small gender-based analysis. And finally, they got someone to petition, and they had 500 signatures, and they passed it in the House of Commons and stuff like that. And they still have not gotten the gender-based analysis on Bill C-16. And the reason that they're saying this is the case, or potentially the case, because they can't know until they get it, is they will find that the Bill C-16 actually has an adverse effect on women. And if it has an adverse effect on women, it's going to be thrown out. Or it has grounds to be appealed or whatever. That's situation one, the suppression of the gender-based analysis of Bill C-16, which has the power to potentially throw it out. Number two is that there's another bill that's going to be proposed soon after. I think it's called SC-88 or something. Don't quote me on that. But it takes the things of Bill C-16 and moves them even further. Like it extends them. That's number two. Number three is that they said, okay, you know what, Bill C-16, you're saying you don't want to compel speech. That is something you shouldn't do. That is built into law. You should never compel speech. You're saying you don't want to compel speech. You're saying Bill C-16 doesn't compel speech. So here's the thing. We propose an amendment to Bill C-16 that removes that little portion that might compel speech. What do you guys think about that? Everything else is still in there. We just remove this one portion that does not seem to be in line with the vision of this country. And it was unanimously rejected. That one small thing. So there's 3 pieces of evidence that says, hey, look, it is actually about compelled speech. And there's more on this too. I don't have time to get into that. There's much more on this too. That makes it seem very, very shady. And people can say it's a conspiracy theory or whatever. But here are the facts. This is happening. This is actually happening. So furthermore to the velvet totalitarianism, you can say, okay, there are people that are engaging in this willingly and intently. And then you can say something about the people that kind of just fall into line. And there's a concept. It's called ketman. It's an Arabic concept. It's a position taken by those who attempt to be at one with others in order to not be alone. So, for example, intellectuals in Stalinist Russia had to adapt quickly. Ketman goes deeper than lying. Everything they say is a performance. So if a medical doctor says, hey, you know what? I do not believe this, but I'm going to say it to further our society or something. They've convinced themselves this is the right thing to say. The ends justify the means, which is never a good argument to make, I don't think. I can move further, or you can comment on that, Ben Rice.
You go ahead.
Okay.
I think you're pretty much in line with saying what you want to say.
Yes. So there are people who are being malicious here. There are people that are falling into line behind them because they want to belong, and then there are the silent minority and things like that. Which brings me to something interesting. 2 more points. something very interesting. There's a Polish proverb or something like that. There's a concept, and there's two Jews that are coming home from synagogue, and this is told by Barbara Kay. They're coming home from synagogue, and then two hooligans chase them with intention to beat them up, and the two Jews run away, and halfway home or something like that, or one of the Jews turns to the other and says, "Hey, there's two of them and two of us. Why are we running?" And then the other Jew says, "Because they are together and we are alone." And that's true. If you see this in social media and everything, it's not that a majority of people are pushing these ideas. It's that a minority of people are being vocal and are on the same side and are unified in their malicious hatred or whatever it is, their demonization of other individuals, and that the people on the receiving end are all alone. Like if you go against the idea of this is the values they're are presenting are unscientific, no one's going to really step up and be like, "Hey, fuck you, man. That's fucked up. Like, do not target this person. That's true." Whereas anybody who's ready to jump on board will be like, "Yeah, cancel that guy. Yeah, fuck that guy. Yeah, you know, I liked his content, but now I don't anymore." Re-educate yourself. All these things that you see, and it happens everywhere. Or you have the tech industries behind it. You have the loss of the job of James Damore, or all sorts of cases like this. There's tons of cases like this where it's just like, because they're together and we are alone, even though we are in greater number, they are able to have more power and more effect than we are, even though it's not in our best interest. Does that make sense?
I think so. Shared ideation and ideology is something that people can unite over, and even if they represent a minority of individuals, it can start to have an disproportional influence on a majority of other people who might feel a different way. And in any society that is meant to be one of what we would consider to be one of the most democratic ways of running a society is having a group of people that are giving the majority of their opinion in something like a vote.
But
this
people.
is giving but if you have enough people who are not really resolute on a position, and you have a minority group that is resolved to do something, then they can enact more change, which could be used for good or could be used for not good things.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So I agree with that.
Well, I hope you do, because that's me just restating your position.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. So I had something there that I also wanted to touch on, and it's the idea of activism. So this a lot of my research was done by the video I sent you. It was called Bill C-16 1 year later. That's the video if anybody wants to look it up. It was said that before they had the event, they originally had planned the event at a YMCA nearby. And so they were going to do this, and there was one activist who stood against them. Not a group, just one. And that was enough for them to get deplatformed. This is how severe it is. With universities, same thing happens. Comedians, universities, speakers go to universities. One descendant or anything can go against it and it's shut down. Silencing speech through protest is widely accepted now. It's not okay. It's a terrible idea. So that's something that actually does happen. This is how severe the situation is. Lastly, I want to touch on this, and I have 50 minutes left. Well, there was a cancellation, Ben, right? So I have 50 minutes left, but so we can probably take questions, or we can talk a little bit more about this after. But I want to talk about the idea of pronouns or whatever as an exercise of conformity, of compliance. And I've been saying this a long time. You live your life. You live who you are. You do not embody the the wants of the people around you. You don't live their life, you live yours. You speak to yourself and you speak honestly. And there are lots of quotes that substantiate this. You are betraying your entire life. This is a quote. You are betraying your entire life if you do not say what you think and you do not say it honestly and bluntly. And I can understand how this would be true. And from Douglas Murray, he says, it is so much better.
Bluntly?
That was a quote. It's the quote. But yeah.
Okay. I missed that part of the quote because I was like, well, all right, Doug.
Honestly and bluntly. This wasn't from Douglas Murray. This was from, who was it? Bill C-16. Charles Krauthammer is the guy who quoted that. You're betraying your whole life if you don't say what you think and you don't say it honestly and bluntly. Charles Krauthammer. And I do agree with that, because remember, you are the culmination of all your experiences to this point, and what you think is unique to yourself. Even if it's similar, it's still unique. And to then just say something that someone else says is betraying all of everything you thought or whatever. I can understand that. The thing about Douglas Murray, and I think what I want to do is I want to go through this first part, and then I actually want to play this on stream. I'll give you a sync video, or we can just start at the same time if you would like to. You don't have to, of course. But he says, it is so much better to say what you see instead of shut up. The regret that you sidled through life and the hope that people didn't notice you is a terrible regret to have on your deathbed, and it's one that's common. So if one of the things is that I have the satisfaction of knowing I'm not lying. Not everybody has that. The problem with going along with being told to bend the knee, raise a fist, etc., is it demoralizes you. It makes you a smaller person inside. And it goes both ways. The liberating feeling of not going with the mob, and I'm not just talking about being contrarian, but being who you believe you are and doing what you think is right, is that you get self-respect out of that, and you will probably go on and do better things that you would than if you felt cowardly. And so totalitarian histories across, totalitarian, I've been talking for a long time, movements across history have known this. You grind people down and you make them agree to lies, because then you will make them be able to do anything. This is a known thing. This is a slow progress. And there's a lot of psychological breakdown things, charts, techniques, and research things used and that are available widely. It's public that coincide with these things. So I wanted to play a clip from Douglas Murray, and Ben Rice, you can play it too. I believe I gave you the timestamp, did I not?
Is it in the Discord?
No, but I will pop it in the Discord. I have it here.
You can play it, and I'll share the
video.
Let me see. I can do chat mic, and I can play it as well.
Okay. So
Life. I mean,
here it is. I prepped this a little bit before stream, but it's from Joe Rogan Experience. It's with Douglas Murray. So I'll play it for you now, and I think everybody should hear this. Ready, Ben Rice? Oh, I'll copy it.
I don't know where it is.
Here. I wasn't sure if you're going to have it. There. It's in the Discord.
What is the timestamp?
It's in the URL, but it's 124.11.
Letting it load in. Well. All right. So when you're ready to 3, 2, 1 play?
Okay, you're ready?
I believe so. You count down 3, 2, 1, hit play.
3, 2, 1, play.
You know, and I have the satisfaction of knowing that I'm not lying. And for young people watching in particular, this is just one of the most important things, because as I say somewhere in Madness of Crowds, the problem with being told, the problem with going along with being told to bend the knee, raise the fist, jump through the hoop, is that it demoralizes you. and it makes you a smaller person inside. You will be demoralized because you'll know that you shouldn't have done that, and at some level you will think badly of yourself for having done it. You'll feel regretful, you'll feel cowardly, and it will affect your life in other ways. And the opposite is also true. The person who doesn't stand with the mob, the person who doesn't go along with the mob, the person who refuses to walk with the crowd will feel quietly but significantly better about themselves, and I think will be a better person, and they will achieve more in their lives, whatever that is, because they will have self-respect. And that's what totalitarian movements across history always knew, was that you grind people down and make them agree to lies, because you will then be able to make them do anything. There's this, if I can say so, there's this very, very telling thing that happened in the communist era in Eastern Europe. Václav Havel, great late Czech leader, says this when he was one of the great Czech dissidents and playwrights of the period in the 60s and 70s. He wrote a piece once, which is really worth reading again today, where he cites the example of a greengrocer in Prague who has to put up in his window, like everyone else, the notice that says, "Workers of the world unite." And it's sent by party headquarters to all greengrocers, and you all have to hang it. And Václav Havel says a number of things happened from this. The first thing is that, of course, that the greengrocer is showing to everyone that he is a party loyalist and he wouldn't be able to operate as a business if he didn't do this thing. But it also hangs there every day as a sign of his subjugation. It's a little thing, but it hangs there as a sign of his subjugation. And it reminds him that he's not the man he could be. Now, one of the results of that is that such a person ends up hating the people who make him hang the sign, hates him because they have demoralized him. But Havel's point, among others, is you think you're doing a little thing, but you're not. You are diminishing your soul by doing this, because you know that you could be something more than the person who just has to hang whatever party headquarters tells you to hang this week.
Well said. Thank you.
That's the part I wanted to show Ben Rice. Am I here? Oh, he says 1 second.
All right, was trying to get back to it. At the risk of derailing, just man, Joe Rogan's little grunt of affirmation there just made me giggle.
Yeah.
I don't know. He just.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, but that's what I believe, and that's what I've been saying all this time. Is it is not a small thing that people think they're doing. It's not a small thing that you try and say to others. It is you are chipping away at your soul. You are losing yourself. You are diminishing yourself. And that's also why I can end on this in terms of the discussion between us, and then we can go to questions. But it's also, I refuse to put pronouns in my Twitter. I refuse to put pronouns in my emails. I refuse to do these small little things. I refuse to change the way I speak, not saying blind anymore. And all of these things. And I've felt this for a very long time. Not because I'm ableist, not because I have it out for the trans people, because I don't. I really do believe, hey, go and live your best life. But because I will not comply to these ideas. I will not. I refuse to comply with these ideas. I will not be that greengrocer. And I would rather live a life without his grocery shop or whatever it is to me, or having my stream get canceled, etc., rather than comply to that one thing, because I do agree. That is not something I will, that I refuse. That is not something I will do.
I don't think you need me to rearticulate that. I think that was pretty straightforward. So
Okay.
I'll believe.
Do you want to say anything before we get to questions? Because I got 40 minutes left.
Yeah, you okay? Doing good?
That was a lot of information.
Yeah, well, it is a lot, and I don't think the definition stuff is boring necessarily. I think that I'm always interested in how those interact with things, and I think that that's important context. You can't build a house without a foundation, and being able to address you know, the differences of definitions and then even defining what a stipulative definition is, because I think a lot of people take for granted that understanding of the thoughts and concepts that they have goes deeper than just to, well, it just is the way it is, but trying to understand why things have come to the positions that they are is useful and it's interesting to me. And you know, if someone doesn't like it, well, them. But let's if you want to do question type stuff, I feel like
Yeah, sure, we can do questions.
I feel like we kept it from everything from burning down completely.
Yeah, thanks for doing this, Ben Rice. I know you said you didn't want to put your perspective in there, but I do appreciate.
Well, it's not so much that it's not so much not me wanting to put my perspective. I just know that the purpose of this for me.
Oh no. You can. I would
different.
rather you put your perspective into these things. 100%. I would rather you put your perspective. Your eyes went so wide.
I don't feel as quite as led to do so as you do. And I'll admit that my perspective or my position on a lot of these things is not fully fleshed out yet. I feel like you're way more that your opinions on these are held more strongly than my opinions on these topics are. And whether that's a lack of time spent with them or feeling connectedness to it, or just that I'm a pretty I get curious about certain things, but I am usually very much in my own, in my own stuff, where I'm focused on the things that I'm focused on and haven't given as much time towards these. So it's not a lack of, I want to make it clear that it's not necessarily a fear. Like I have these opinions and thoughts and I can't share them because then, white cis middle class Ben is going to get canceled. There's always that in the back of my mind of like, what things am I even allowed to talk about? But it's less a fear of wanting to share my opinion and more a matter of, I think our conversation is going to be more fruitful if we try to go into yours, because when it comes to coming to a solid position, I don't necessarily always have one, and I think it's also okay to say that. I have a friend who, whenever we would get into conversations, like, what do you think about that? I'm like, I guess I really haven't thought about it, and he always thinks that I'm being dishonest when I say that. He's like, you have an opinion, you probably agree with me, but you're scared to say it because you're white.
Is this
yes.
Yeah.
You know who it is. I don't have to say it. You know who it is. It always is that case where it's like, no, I don't have a strong feeling about this, or I don't feel a conviction to state that in that way. And so that's really what this was, because that was the format of this. And I hope no one got too frustrated, like, why isn't Ben pushing back on this? Or Ben should say this or feel this and shut Faraaz down on X, Y, or Z. And that wasn't the purpose of this. I have a couple times where I want to try and present some devil's advocate stuff overall, but here's my understanding of the most defensible position in competition with your own. But yeah, overall that.
There was none of that, by the way. Like, everybody was pretty good.
Well, I tried to represent it. Oh, you mean in the chat?
Oh,
okay, that's
one
nice
thing I forgot that I just wanted to say, just a fun fact. I told you this last night, Ben Rice, but I told you it wrong. So Lindsay Shepherd said this. She said in certain classrooms, teachers are encouraged not to say boys and girls, but encouraged instead to call their student body comrades. Which
I'm going to now do, by the way. I'm going to just start doing that.
Which is
not because I feel compelled to, but because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Viva la revolution.
Comrades.
Yep, that's my new held position.
Pretty messed up. Okay, cool.
Messed up. Hey, there's nothing wrong with that, comrade.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No. The idea of, like, let's not say boys and girls, let's say comrades. That's what they do in North Korea. That's what they do in
I would just personally. I heard her say that, by the way.
Russia. Yeah.
I heard her. No, I mean, that's where
That
it's
was a
associated.
component
That's not
of
where
it.
the word comrades is from.
Okay, that's also
let me
saying,
say though, the
okay,
right thing to say is children.
children.
Because if you're gonna like, I don't want to say boys and girls. I just say kids. I call everyone's kids now.
Sure, but then you could also just say boys and girls. Like it's not, it's a ridiculous thing. Anyway, why don't we take a few questions while I still have time to be here, and then Ben Rice will continue. So if you want to
Yeah, I'm
talk
streaming all day,
to us about
so.
anything, or you want clarification from Ben Rice, you can just talk to him later as well. But
Yeah.
Kerchak,
Well, I'll
if
do
you
the
found
best
any
that I
questions,
can. I can't. I will always say that anytime that I'm speaking on behalf of Faraaz, I'm doing my best. But you'd have to ask him to get his full clarification. I am not a perfect paragon of being able to represent all of his positions, but I try my best to have an understanding of what my friend thinks.
Yeah. So why don't we have
Comrades,
Yeah.
questions.
Oh, comrades.
Yes.
So
Any
you and
questions
Kerchak
from our comrades?
can pick, and I'll just sit here and
Well, I'll let.
wait.
I'm calling everybody chub mothers, but
Yeah.
All my comrades say
Rebs, thanks for
Clancy.
gifting us up to bundle of Basil. Hi, Basil. All right, so chats are now open. That was good though. Hey, good job. Thanks, Ben Rice, for doing that. That was nerve-wracking. The whole time I'm like, fuck, I'm gonna get canceled. Fuck, if I say this, I'm gonna get canceled. Fuck, here it comes. Canceled. Staff's gonna be in my
Still
chat.
could
Shit, I'm
happen.
gonna
Hey,
get
could
canceled.
happen. Still doesn't
It
matter.
still
You
could
get
happen.
canceled.
Yeah, you could get a report for the VOD or something. So, Rebs, if you don't mind uploading this ASAP.
I think so. There was a moment in time where you bordered on a few things that might have got you canceled, but you strayed away from those very well, I may add. So I doubt that it will happen.
Yeah, I hope so. Since you touched on the topic of communism, are you familiar with Antonio Gramsci? He was an Italian Marxist philosopher who thought the way for revolution was through universities and controlling the culture, not violence. I'm not familiar, but I understand that idea because people are like, oh, these things are like, no one believes this. It's like, no. Your kids believe this. Your teenagers believe this. Your adolescents believe this now because it's taught in schools. And they're going to propagate to society and substantiate these beliefs or enforce these beliefs or, just push these beliefs, and it's going to become more and more widespread without the foundational backing that it requires in order to responsibly do so.
Everyone's just latched onto the comrades thing now, it seems.
That's what people do. Yeah.
Mistakes have been made.
Yeah.
Yeah, you started a new trend.
I think for the most part, whenever chat had like questions or clarifications, Ben actually did a really good job of clarifying post
Hey.
speech for us.
Thank
So I didn't
you.
have to relate much. The only thing was really like about the intersex thing and as it pertains to gender.
Well, we thought that
not being
I still
independent.
think that the position that needs the most personally, when I talk to Faraaz about these things, the position that I would encourage the most development on is the one that you have the book coming for, because that statement is a very. I will be very interested to see what conclusions you come to when it comes to that, basically.
Good question.
I just need to know what I want to know what the definition that you're working from is when it comes to, and that she is working from, that Dr. So is working from.
Yeah, I'm gonna get her.
Because when she when she says like her thing, she came up and I watched the video. I watched it at 1.5 speed because I had a limited amount of time to watch a 2-hour video, and dear fucking God, that comment, the moderator was
You don't
awful.
have to listen.
She is
She's
the
in there
worst.
for like, she is pretty bad.
She was the worst. Her intro stuff. So if you watch the video, just try to ignore her and listen to the speakers and get what you can from it. But Jiminy Christmas, she was difficult. But when there's a lack of it feels like a semantic disagreement in terms of definitionally. And I could understand that you would have a concern with what is being like the colloquial definition, but to say that sex and gender are
but it's
not
being pushed in
variables.
Schools. That's the thing. It's being pushed in schools.
Right. But it's the definition is the thing that I'm struggling, because at no point in her conversation or anywhere am I seeing a different definition being given for gender. It just seems like articulating the distinction of, hello, sir, can I help you?
Yeah, and that's fair, but I think she's speaking to is the effects it's having. So you got people losing their jobs, kicked out of schools, or children being taught unscientific perspectives based on these ideas.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
I'm curious if there's other things we teach that we would say are relatively unscientific. If it's just to look for consistency in our schooling system of if there are things, and if that's common, that's the curiosity that I personally have.
Yeah, and
given that as a defense of saying like you can't teach unscientific things in school, and I'm like, do we have any? Can I think of any examples of something that is taught in school that's not necessarily scientific?
Oh, here's a question. Another question about the bathrooms. Do you think gay people should be allowed to use bathrooms of the same gender? If so, why is there any problem with trans people using either bathroom? So this is something I actually talked to Rebs about, and I said this is a difficult one. But I don't think it has to do with sexual preference. So gay people should be able to use the men's bathroom, and straight individuals the men's bathroom, and vice versa, and so on and so forth. I think that's the case. And the reason I say this is because gay men are still men, right? It has little to do with their sexual preference, and it has more to do with the dynamic between the opposite sexes, between men and women. Because, and I've talked to Revs about this, it's like there are many people, and hopefully you don't mind me saying this, Revs, but she says, if a girl compliments me, it's very flattering. If a guy compliments me, regardless of, orientation, whatever, unless she knows them well, then it is creepy. And this is a position that is common to a lot of people. Not only that, but if a girl is in a group of men, it's a little bit more dangerous than if a guy is in a group of females. There are differences between the sexes, and there are differences in how they interact and approach each other. And as such, bathrooms are what's it called? Places of technical vulnerability and isolation. And so if you have those two dynamics together, then it makes more sense. Okay, look, yes, you're a gay man. Yes, you're attracted to men. Okay, you can use the men's washroom rather than the women's washroom, and so on and so forth. That's what I think about that issue. Of course, it's not an issue I've developed a lot of insight into either. But you can just ask women about it, and this is a lot of things that happen. Is like, hey, how would you feel if there was a males were given access to your bathroom, or transition males to trans females? How would you feel? And I do not believe the consensus would be, oh, it's okay, no big deal.
I would be cautious there.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned, you are not saying you think that trans people are disproportionately sexually violent. That is not a position you would hold.
That is not a position I'm holding.
And I'm making sure we say that out loud.
Thank you for doing that.
Because I'm...
Yeah. Yeah. Pushback to that is an argument could be made about blacks and whites mixing 50 years ago. That I do not believe that argument could be made about blacks and whites mixing together 50 years ago. I'm interested to know if it's an issue of safety, how trans women should protect themselves if they're made to go into men's bathrooms. It's not necessarily an issue of a trans woman protecting herself if she goes into a men's bathroom. It's the issue of the opposite. So it's not universal, it's not like, oh, it's unsafe here and it's flipped unsafe there, or vice versa. That's a symptomatic problem, I think. I think the issue itself is the changing of fundamental building blocks we use for our language, for compassion. But in changing those building blocks, a bunch of structures that are pretty important to society fall apart, like the separation between men and women in bathrooms, or the differentiation between men and female and male categories in combat sports. Those are given things and they're understood for reasons. There are reasoning behind these things. And to then just say, okay, a man can become a woman, which sure. And then from there, they can compete in those sports or switch to the different washrooms or whatever, it might be politically correct, but it isn't without a ton of problems that come with it. And I do not think it's an interesting thing. Douglas Murray also says this. He also says that this conversation is an end of empire conversation. He says generally when empires are about to end, they have conversations about hermaphrodites and gender expression and all of these things. And when Joe Rogan asked him, okay, which empires? He says the Greek and Roman empires, right before they ended, they had these conversations. And he's not saying, to clarify, I can see Ben Rice frowning. He's not saying
I'm
these.
not frowning. I'm just like,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So to clarify,
we pulled up the chat logs from the Greek and Roman empires, and they started talking about hermaphrodites.
No, you
and
can
suddenly
look at
they
it
went out. That just
in
sounds
history, but I'm not saying that these lead to the end of society, but I am saying what I believe comes from that is the destabilization of the building blocks you use fundamentally for language, and as such, countless problems that arise, as such as the instantiation of law that is based on feelings and not objective metrics, which leads to the downfall of society. And instead of focusing on issues like, hey, like let's live in an underwater city, or let's go to Mars, or let's improve our technology, or let's, do this or that, you're focused on how many black musicians are here, or how many black writers are here, instead of just saying like, oh, how many good writers are here, or how, like, that's an interesting writer over there. Like, it changes everything. It changes the way society looks at things. And I do not believe it is a net positive. I do not believe it is a good thing to do. I think because it is a complex issue, people are saying, oh, it's compassionate, jumping on that train, rather than being like, hey, look, this is less than 1%. This is going to be a terrible thing to say, and people are going to hate me for it, but this is less than 1% of the population, and you are changing the language of 99% of the population and not just changing it, but limiting, destabilizing, and refurbishing on the basis of compassion. And I do not think that's a smart thing to do.
Yeah, I think your strongest argument there is still is the concern with ambiguity in societal implementation of legislative things.
Bill C-16. So someone's asking which law was instantiated on feelings. Gender identity is by definition how you feel about something. It's placed completely on good faith. Like, oh yeah, they feel this way, they must be this, right? It's not based on, or they say it's not based on objective metrics, and now that is in Bill C-16, reasonable grounds for discrimination, which none of the other grounds for discrimination share in terms of objectivity. So it's subjective, not objective. The other grounds for discrimination are very objective.
Janiko, it's whether or not you believe it is, it's the point here, at least, is that's Faraz's, he's taking that given information and those points and coming to the conclusion of that prediction, because it's impossible for anyone to like be able to say with 100% certainty. In fact, we can't tell the future. But I believe Faraaz is saying, like, this is my read on the situation, and this is what I believe based off of the math in my head of what this will lead to.
Yes, and it's also
so I think someone could argue and say, I'm presented with the same information, and I believe that it will result in a different outcome. And that is a position that they could defend as well. So
yeah, Yeah. Basically what it is for me is I have a certain way of doing things, and it comes back to what Douglas Murray says, is that what do you believe in? What are you going to do? So I'm presented with a bunch of things socially that I do not want to adhere to. And I do not think it is right to adhere to. It's not just want. I do not think it is right to adhere to these things. And all of these reasons are reasons that substantiate that view that, hey, I'm not going to put pronouns in my emails. I do not think it's a good thing to do to normalize pronouns. I do not think that having this in law is a small thing. I do not think it's okay to be have potential punitive action against you for misgendering someone. I do not think these are good things we should have. And as such, I am expressing myself on that basis and also explaining why I conduct myself in that fashion.
Yeah, to clarify something in your chat, this has never been my goal was never to present a position other than Faraz's. He's talking about stuff that he talks about often, and usually he's distracted by playing a video game. This was an opportunity for us to sit down and for him to give a position, me to do my best to help him articulate his strongest version of that position, and to also attempt to provide some potential expected critiques and counter examples throughout. That's all it ever was. This is not. There was never a goal of either of us to change each other's minds. I'm just trying to help him articulate what he's already been talking about.
Yeah. And so one thing I also want to touch on is that someone came and said this debate or talk is already wrong because we don't have a trans person included in this.
Well, and that's why I was clarifying that it's not a that it's not a debate. And like this isn't a perspective of us trying to come to a universal consensus while having, you know, enough representation of any particular thing. I started at the beginning of the conversation by clarifying neither of us are making authoritative statements on the reference that we're both experts in a field. We're talking about ideas, and the fact that someone would recommend that we can't have the conversation is I think the base of Faraz's concern, and it is concerning to me that someone would be like, hey, you can't even talk about this stuff without having X, Y, or Z present.
Yeah, and
right. I want to be able to talk about things. I want to be able to have discussions that are meaningful and not vapid and boring like the most of. All right, Ben talking here, not me just trying to say Faraz's position, but I think we genuinely agree on this. It is super frustrating to always have to stop and just go like, you know what, we can't talk about this. We can't talk about this. It is beyond the pale to even consider or to present a position that is like, can we come to that? Can we give people a little bit of room to come to an understanding or a position? Can we make it there so we're able to have conversations, especially some that like, whether or not think the research was adequate to fully educate us to the level of a PhD on the topic, that's an impossible standard to put. We're not going to be able to talk about anything ever. Then, like, where does the line get drawn? You have to be able to talk about things.
Yeah, and
it's necessary for growth.
This goes further with the idea of inclusivity. So these movements often identify themselves with inclusivity, and I do not find that at all. In fact, I find the opposite of inclusivity. So, for example, the idea of cultural appropriation is a ridiculous thing, and it's kind of being what is propagated here. It's a ridiculous thing, and so is cultural, equal representation. Equal representation is garbage.
It always every time we're talking about anything, and you say ridiculous, it always sounds like you're making an appeal to an emotional state as opposed to
it's absolutely ridiculous.
A logic-based one.
It's ridiculous.
Okay. Yep,
okay. Anyway,
I'm trying anyway.
Yeah, those ideas, cultural appropriation and equal representation, basically are stating that myself, because I'm brown, I'm originally from Bangladesh for all the fucking Soul's voice, can only talk about things in brown. I can only talk about Bollywood, curry. The language dynamics, I can only talk about those things. And if I'm to engage in any discussion, let's say about hip hop or or something like that, I need a black representative accompanying me, or I'm going to talk about anything that burgers for white people, who knows, or something like that. It's a ridiculous proposal. There's a Spanish chef who was accused of cultural appropriation because he was white and he cooked Spanish cuisine, and he probably knows more about Spanish cuisine than a lot of people that are actually Spanish, but it's a ridiculous idea. So that kind of also feeds into the idea of equal representation. Just because I am not this group does not mean I cannot commentate on the experiences of this group. Yes, sure. Like with this is dangerous, so do not
comment on, not commentate.
Yeah,
right? You're commenting on
this is
on
dangerous.
Your perception of the view. Yeah,
but this was a point that was brought up, and so this is do not get out of hand.
I'm grabbing water while you doing the dangerous thing, just so I'm not on screen in case this gets clipped and I'm
get out. So the idea of he's off, he's gone. Okay, abortion, right? It was raised the other day that men do not have a place. Stop! Don't laugh. Men do not have a place in talking about abortion. And that's, I think, ridiculous, because it's like the argument is that, oh, it's not your body, it's not this or not that, whatever, you don't have a place in it. And it's like, no. If someone's beating up a puppy over there, I can say that's injustice. I can say that's wrong, or I can say, hey, good job. I can do whatever I want. I can comment on what I see. It's not that I just don't tell him or that person, whoever, that they can't do this. It's like, no, the idea that you can only comment on something that you have direct experience in is ridiculous. Very ridiculous. And that's kind of an idea that's propagated. Sorry, Ben Rice.
I walk away and I'm like, all right, I wonder what he's going to talk about. All right. And abortion. Okay.
Yeah.
Staying away from any kind of charged topics today, I can see.
Yeah. Might as well get it all out.
Someone tagged us. On the subject of race, what do you make of Morgan Freeman's approach? Roughly, stop talking about it, basically saying part of the problem is the fact that constant reminder of Black American history. Black American history is a different. I mean, Kerchak is our person who we can like defer to in terms of that, I guess. If someone's really? Like, you don't have a black guy on, well, we've got a magical one with a voice like Morgan Freeman. So get f***ed, you haters. My understanding seems to be that I don't want to tell people what their experience should be in that. I'm not quite comfortable saying like, hey, here, Black culture in America, this is how you should all deal with this thing that was very real and very much happened. I'm still listening and curious about it. I feel like it might be overly dismissive to just say that there's no, because I think, in my best understanding, is the reason that this is discussed at all is because there are still things that are in existence that are affected by that history. And hopefully we get to a point where there's no longer an instance of that, where you can say, like, look at these things that still exist societally that when we're talking about the like equality of opportunity in certain circumstances and situations where some people are set back further because of a history of systemic problems. So I don't know if we're ready to say that we're so far past all these things that we can't continue to have the conversation.
So good.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the position that I would say. Like, I'm not going to tell a person that they should or shouldn't talk about something that affects them more personally than it affects me.
Yeah. So I'll go.
But I would say that the conversation seems still necessary.
I'll go with the perspective of the guy, Daryl. I can't remember his last name, but he's the black musician who made friends with the top of the KKK and got him to quit the KKK. If anybody has his name, just type it in chat. That guy, What he said is, he said there was a time for Black History Month, and it brought attention to a lot of Black historians and people, and it was useful. And he says now is the time. Daryl Davis, yeah. Now is the time to get rid of Black History Month and include them among everybody else. So instead of just saying, "Oh, Black History
Just
Month,"
History Month.
yeah, it's History Month. So we just go over everybody who is useful, and they happen to be Black. Not Black people get this month, and then the rest of the year is other non-Black people. It's to reintegrate them into the idea of history. And this is what I was saying earlier, and this is what I say with group identity, is often people see things and they advocate for group identity, but they don't understand the negative connotation of it in different situations. So instead of talking about good writers, we talk about Black writers. Instead of talking about great writers, bad writers or whatever, or different writers, we talk about Spanish writers or whatever. It's like there's a priority on the race of the writer rather than the writing themselves. And because of that, they will always be separated in a way. You do not want to advocate for group identity, and you do not want to base certain things on group identity. You want to skew towards a civilization of an individual, regardless of their race, color, whatever. They can do this and they can do good, and their race wasn't a limiting factor. But the idea of we should promote Black creators, we should promote Black restaurant owners based solely on their color of skin promotes an idea of group identity, and it acts against the very movement that they should be working towards, which is the idea of like, oh yeah, there's a writer over there. What color is he? Oh, it doesn't matter, right? Not like, oh, he's Black, so he should get the job.
I could see that as being a diminishment of their qualifications, right?
Yeah,
if someone's saying the reason you got the job is because of your skin color, it almost can be it can be almost dehumanizing. We're downplaying
Rev
the person's
said this too.
actual qualifications.
She said it's now sketchy. I don't remember who else said this. Someone else in chat, where they said, I don't actually writes to this. I don't know if I got the job because I'm qualified for it or because I'm a woman. And it's very, it shakes my certainty here. And I don't like it. And this is a concept, a consequence of group identity. And people think it's just all great, but it's like, I don't know. You're talking just as much about the perception of and possible relations of other to trans people entering the bathroom as you're about. Yeah, it's not just necessarily about trans people going into bathrooms or not bathrooms. It's just a vulnerability thing overall.
And in general, that's something to keep in mind, and something that is a difficult area to go into is, like we mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, there are potentially defensible reasons to maintain gendered spaces. I know some people that would push for societal abolition. Like gender abolitionism is a position that people have where they're like, I want to get rid of the idea of gender stereotypes and have people just be people, as an idea of not having it be something that is group identity. And we're just all just people without having any kind of concept of like how one should act in response to their gender. It's everybody can just sort of exist as humans. But in certain circumstances, things like gendered spaces could be made defensible. Largely, you see it given example in places like in protection of women from abusive situations. That is usually what we see as the defended positions of things like rape counseling or abuse shelters, and in having gendered spaces, being advocated by, my understanding is by feminists who say like, oh, womanhood is something that is a unique experience that we need to make sure that they have places in some of these vulnerable spots in society for protection. And I think I'm not comfortable trying to dissuade someone from having, like, I'm not comfortable making an argument like we should just abolish it and not be, have consideration for those people in society. So that, yeah, I think you can, when in regards to gendered spaces, I think that's an argument that also needs to be considered.
Yeah. Okay, I do have to go. So
I know you have to go.
Why don't we do final Final questions and closing remarks, if you guys have any.
Chester, what do you want, bud? Oh, you want food, you little chub. Get off of there. That's why he's being so cuddly. In what situations is censorship okay? Advocation of violence, I think, is the position that both Faraaz and I would or that I know that I would take. If you're inciting violence against a person, I think that's usually where we try to limit someone's speech in something.
Inciting violence against a person, and actually inciting, not just like, he said like, this is like inciting
yelling
violence.
Fire in a movie theater, like those sorts of things. When we talk about when it's a good thing to prevent somebody from being able to, and you're always welcome to say. I mean, I think societally, you're always welcome to say anything. The question is the aftermath of how you will be treated or how what you say will be received by people. And when we start to legislate actions in response to certain statements and saying things, then I know Faraz's position on this is you have to make sure that your failure rate, you have to demonstrate that you're going to be right enough that it's not going to completely destabilize someone's entire life if they get caught out, being in the unfortunate misunderstanding. Because anytime you take a thought or an idea or a personally held belief and you turn it into a law, that person's individual freedom is at risk, whether rightfully or wrongfully, because now it is backed by violent force of a government. And when someone's like, what do you mean? Jaywalking is enforced by the violent force of the government. You get fined. You say, no, I won't pay the fine. You go to jail. If you try not to go to jail, they will come with people with guns and put you in jail for something as little as crossing the street where it's not listed. We don't think about those things because you're like, what is the cost to doing this action? But the government enforces law with the promise of violent retribution, because at any extreme, if you refuse to accept the smaller things, you are submitted to the larger extreme. You will comply if it's in legislation, or you will have your freedoms removed up to your freedom to live.
Yes, and it is also, even if it's not jail, it's financially. They will bankrupt you. They will make your life a living hell. They will do they'll freeze your accounts. They'll do all sorts of things. As a
that's why it matters. That's why those things matters. And you have to be like, okay, well, this is legislation. Why not just get over it? It's like, well, it does affect people. Any small change to legislation, which is why government is so slow. It's supposed to be slow. It's designed with checks and balances to make it slow, to try and prevent catastrophic destabilization happening all at once, and preventing people from being able to live by some sort of totalitarian or dictatorial uprising. Like that's at least in Canada and in America. I can't speak to other parts of the world that have other government systems, but
okay.
Did everyone ever went to jail? It's not a question of did they. It's a question of could you. That's what I mean. Yeah. Anytime something is legislated, it is you have to understand all politics is violent. It is all backed by saying that's what laws mean, that if you don't follow a law, there is some sort of follow through. And anytime something is made law, at the extreme end position, if you just choose to not do the thing, it is backed by people with guns that will take your life from you. That's how you have to start thinking about it. To really understand what it means when you add something into legislation. That's the severity of any law that gets enabled or enacted.
Yes.
So.
Okay. As a closing remark, I would just like to say that if you listen to this whole thing, I don't know how long we went for a while. But if you listen to
3 hours.
Yeah, 3 hours. And what I would very highly recommend you focus on, and this is what I consider to be more important as well, is not necessarily the details. While the details are important, this is more important, is the idea that things are progressively, slowly but progressively, becoming more and more totalitarian. And it's under the basis of compassion, and it's infecting society. And all sorts of different things are infected already. Science is infected. Medicine is infected. There's all sorts of different places where things are infected. And small compliances are really a mechanism in which this is happening, and it's really, really, really not good. And so if you think things are bad now, things are going to get far worse in the future before they get better, far worse. And so before you jump on the train or the bandwagon or say what someone else wants you to say, I would highly recommend you look at the situation now, imagine it 10 times worse, and then choose to act against that, so that in 10 years or so, it might not be as bad as it could have been, if that makes sense. Yeah, look past, try and look at the intentions of the people that are leading these things, not just what they're saying and the effects that it's causing, because really I do not believe you want to live in a totalitarian society, or in a society where myself and Ben Rice have to be very, very, very careful to talk about anything that might be contentious, despite it being scientific or right. You don't want a society where scientists can't conduct research properly and all of their research is biased towards politics. You don't want a society where the medical professionals are not telling you their opinion and what they think is right, but instead what they're supposed to tell you. And these are things that are all happening now. You don't want a society where your kids are confused and taught things that aren't necessarily true or scientific. You don't want that, and those things are all happening now. So if anyone requires any sources for what I've had, I have a document for it. Other than that, thanks, Ben Rice, for doing this. Thanks, Kerchak, for moderating. I will host Ben Rice, and if you have any questions or comments or you want us to talk more, let us know. If you enjoyed this talk and you would like to see more, please do type 1-1 in chat. If you didn't want more, 2-2. I want to just have that for reference. And
then we'll be able to safely, I mean, if you all say 2-2, then you know our jobs are safe, because we'll never talk about contentious things again. And anytime something comes up in chat, you'll just be like, oh, can't do it. Sorry, Twitch. We'll just go ahead and, hey, what's your favorite game? Fucking Dark Souls. I love it. It's so good. Hardest game ever.